Welcome to Duncan Thorin Shields YouTube channel. I managed to con Duncan into convincing his friend to pay me thousands of dollars as a professional Counter-Strike player, so maybe he can convince you that some of his analysis is correct.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Strat Book. Obviously, we've gone back in time and LEGIJA does CS again now. No, he still does Valorant. He actually is doing that still. And by the way, if people don't know, even though everyone memes on everyone in Valorant, actually the team LEGIJA was working with were actually like really close to making it to like the big champions thing at the end of the year. They were like the second best in their region. And if people don't know, the team actually from their region, this is what's different about Valorant, is in Valorant, the best team in each region actually could all contend, basically. Like it's actually a very unique FPS game in that sense. So if people don't know, the team from that region is the fucking mega one. It's that Paper X squad that like straight up could have just won the whole thing and been the best team of the year. So LEGIJA, before we get into the whole show, obviously I should ask you, like, do you still care about CS? Do you follow it? And what's the status at the moment? Are you fully in Valorant? What's the situation? If this was a TV show and someone only tuned in on the last episode.
No, obviously I still follow, but pretty much the more bigger tournaments, the major Blast Series and stuff. I don't follow like the tier 2 scene too much, but the big tournaments I still follow. It's still my passion, and the funny thing is you can still learn about things when you watch CS and like bring it up to Valorant, just team play and all this stuff. So it still makes sense for me to watch. And on top of that, I still have love for the game.
Yeah, listen, I don't blame you. I mean, you spent most of your career playing tier 2 tournaments, so, you know, you get bored if you're not even in them anymore. Who just wants to watch them now? Whatever. Listen, we had to get the old chemistry back. We had to get the old rapport back between us. No, I was even saying before we started, like, the obvious joke is, if people are wondering why LEGIJA is suddenly in Valorant, it's like, obviously, it's a bit like hostages between countries, you know, because we wanted God B back in CSGO. We had to trade LEGIJA for him, you know. It's like we went to the border. We're like, right, you can take one big guy, we take the other guy. Right, let's go back.
And there's worse things than being replaced by Guppy, so
that's true. If anyone's going to replace him, he's pretty good. Right, so obviously the guest for this episode is going to be Ruggah, who technically doesn't call himself Ruggah on Twitter anymore, but if you know how esports works, you'll be Ruggah till you die, mate. That's just the way it works at this point in time. The aliases all stay, as I've tried to tell. See, the only person I'll give credit to who did get away with it was, I don't know if you know this, Ruggah, but you know back in Source when Richard got rid of his alias, which I won't even mention just to do him a favour, because he used to have his alias on Cadrid. He always used to tell me, like, oh, we should get rid of aliases. And I used to think the same thing, like, people will always think he's that. But actually, to be fair, he's just Richard Lewis now, so I guess he won that one. But what we wanted to do was, on this show, if people don't know, the premise is, that's why it's called Strat Book. We sort of get in-game leaders or coaches on, and we just sort of have a conversation about players they've played with their teams. And the idea is, it's not literally like a quiz about your style as a coach, but it's like in talking to you, we'll find out what your philosophy is and how you see different players and stuff. So people don't know, this was actually a rare episode that wasn't like I just asked someone. It's like actually it came out of one of those, what would have just been a stupid drama on Twitter, because the worst thing about Twitter, aside from the character length, is because you're not looking at the person and you just sort of like, to me, it's quite a petty format. You just sort of like throw little shitty remarks at each other, then you just like run away for a few hours, like, what did he say? What the fuck's he? And then you just throw another one, like, well, whatever. And then like, and no one's really trying to actually have a conversation, you know. That's why mostly it sucks for actual real discussion. So I always think what you should do is, yeah, let's all do that, 'cause it is funny in its own way, it's like the playground. But if you want to have a real discussion, let's just actually do a show. Let's just actually have a chance to unpack it all, listen to what people think. So Ruggah obviously is currently the coach of OG, and in the past has been the coach of teams like OpTic, North, a whole bunch of other squads. You mainly associated, obviously, coming from Denmark with the Danish teams, etc. So actually, what I thought we'd do, Ruggah, is this. Let's just start with what the drama point was. And then in talking about that, we'll work our way backwards and we'll talk about some of the other squads and some of the other things you think about. So basically what happened was the new OG team. This is where I think it might be interesting, because actually I've noticed on a lot of my shows, we haven't really talked about this team that much, because unfortunately it's sort of flown under the radar last few months. I would say this, I actually have a pretty different take on this team to a lot of people, it seems. Some people got really hyped when the squad was like first put together, because it had that the other Blast finals run where they were beating the top teams, like including Navi, etc. And then later, I know nowadays at this last major, it seems like a lot of people just counting out anyway and didn't even have them in the top 8, weren't even picking them for the pick 'em. I actually had them in my pick 'em, and the reason why is this. I actually think that team's fucking loaded with skill. It's like the problem is you have to know basically that tier 2 scene and have watched Sinners play last year, the last 2 years. If you know that, I think that team's fucking mega. Like I've said to people, if I was teams like Team Liquid, I would be like, why haven't we got Dexter? Why do we still have OC? Like this should be the guy we would have gone for. This would have been the player that would take us to the top of the major. So, Ruggah, let's start there. This is, of all the past lineups, there's a lot of people who complained or had different thoughts on the past lineups of OG. This is a pretty good set of players, right?
think it's very good. I think we did a very good job, as you say, like scouting the tier 2 scene for players that fit the style we wanted to have moving forward. Because it's no secret in today's modern version of CS that skill matters. I think a lot of teams have come late to that party. I think also OG through history, we were a bit late to pick up on that trend, getting like the big talents coming up that really hit headshots, because at the end of the day, this generation that comes up, they have a work ethic like we haven't experienced before, and that obviously combined with the skill, it makes for very exciting prospects. And I would also say like the pickups we did with Fico and neofrag definitely fell into that to that book about like a lot of skill, maybe a bit raw, but at least we can mold them into something we would want as a team, and also to match the philosophy moving forward. And then there's also like adding Dexter to the mix as the final puzzle is something I'm very happy with.
So I'll set up basically what the drama was. It wasn't really a drama, it was just people disagreeing on Twitter. Basically what happened was Alan Hender, who people might know came up under me and Flashpoint, that was doing the major. He posted after OG, I think it was after the elimination, he posted like a screenshot of part of a HLTV interview with Dexter, who obviously is the big name now, especially because of last major, before that where he'd gone in the semis with Spirit and everyone. Like I say, people thought he was a top talent. In fact, people even thought maybe he should be in like a Navi or a team like this, because obviously he comes from the CIS region. And the story goes, right, I will add in a piece of context before I explain it, which is I've actually read quite a few Dexter interviews. And by the way, it doesn't matter what team he's in. I even think this is where fans are going to get Dexter totally wrong. He's clearly not just a totally toxic guy, because he seems to talk this way in all of his teams. He's just a really blunt guy, as far as I can tell, and who doesn't really seem to like put any polish or sheen on it. He just says what he thinks. And so in his interview, because he'd been eliminated, you're thinking, right, if he says anything now, it must be sort of like shooting shots at people, or the reason why maybe if it's not him, other people have fucked up. And so in the interview, he mentions that the most important thing in the team is the coaches, which is ruggah. And then he also mentions actually it's LEGIJA's boy from back in the day, biggest Kakafufu, or whatever is it, Kakafu, sorry. I'll just say it wrong on purpose because you'll know I had a slight beef for them. LEGIJA's fuck him. I don't really give a shit. I've done a who's this Kakafufu or something? No, obviously Kakafu, who used to be like the assistant coach of Big back in the day. And then I'll just throw this in as well. And when I did a recent reflections with Capio, he seemed to hate him and think he was a snake, but that was Capio, not me. It was just one of the greatest German players of all time said that. Kakafu wasn't me. Just take it up with Capio. So what I would say is this. He basically says that you make it like a really positive environment in the team, like there's no toxic aspect. And the problem is, that all sounds great, right? If you're actually a Westerner or from like your region, like Scandinavia, that's what people dream of in a team, ruggah. But the problem is, if you know ruggah, Dexter rather, comes from Russia, and if you look at his style of play, he obviously does have that like solo carry mentality, like give me the AWP, I kill the bot. He is that guy, you can just tell. He's mega, by the way, he's really good at doing it. But the implication is, he maybe doesn't want that. And so what Alan read into this is, because you look at this strong, skilled set of team, he took the perception of like, right, they're too nice. The coaches, what they're not doing is they're just sort of telling people like, yeah, good job, like, oh, that's fine, like, yeah, good, even when somebody did. Whereas obviously what it sounds like Dexter and somebody who thinks that OG didn't perform enough wants is they want you to come in and be like, what the fuck is this? Like, that's bad, he's trash. Like, I don't, well, that's an exaggeration too, but you get the premise wrong. I've set it up there. So give me your thoughts on this topic. Like, why did this annoy you? Like this take that like maybe the coaches aren't hard enough or they're too nice on the players. What's off about this?
I think there are like some different elements to it, because obviously working with young players, you cannot be full toxic and like really go at them as soon as they make the smallest mistakes. So at that point on, I'm not trying to create this type of environment, because I think I had it previously with other teams where every small mistake gets pointed out, every small thing is get corrected, and then at the end of the day, your players are kind of afraid to play because now the only thing about is making mistakes, right? But with that said, it's not like we're like fully ignorant and just like doing kindergarten, holding each other's hand and clapping each other's like backpacks and stuff. No, like we try to set it up in a way where it's constructive, and with constructive obviously also comes approaching people in different ways. So even though we might have a positive environment, it doesn't mean that I'm not harsh on the players. I could say, as Les says yesterday, I had to do one of the harder speeches, trying to give the players kind of a wake-up call, because what they've been putting in like lately have not been good enough, and that also took pointing out a lot of stuff that was happening lately. So it's not like we're trying to just pat each other's backs, but at the end of the day, working with younger players, it's also a balance about, okay, what is the right approach with these players? Because as you also say, like players aren't exactly the same. Dexter comes from CIS region, Flames comes from Israel. Like we have players from all over the world, and a lot of things that like when you work with these type of players in international teams, you need some sort of groundwork, a ground where everyone at least can agree on something. And positive environment for a lot of these young players is definitely one of them. But we try to keep it mainly around like the official matches, and then we can go a bit more into detail and call each other out on stuff we shouldn't be doing when it comes to like practice and normal work weeks.
Right, LEGIJA, what's funny is normally it's actually pretty common when people are public, actually, that everyone has the American approach of like, oh, you're supposed to be really like careful with the players, like don't make anyone's feelings get hurt. But the reason why I thought it would be funny that we're going to discuss this on this show is if people don't know, Big actually has a reputation of being exactly the opposite. Like you remember that story, LEGIJA, when fucking Ruggah, who was briefly in the team, he was actually in Valorant now if people don't know, he did that twit longer when he got kicked out the team. And in it, he even said, and by the way, he is German as far as I know, or at least, is he German or is he Austrian? Which one of the two, right? I think
it's German.
Yeah. So he's even from Germany. It's not even like it's Smoothie when he's coming from UK. He basically said, no joke, that when you were in Big, it was like people just screaming in your face in German, like every mistake you made. Like, look, I'm sure he was a bit bitter that he got kicked out the game. But what I want to ask is, like, what was the environment in Big like this? Like, how was Big able to have like more of a harder? Is it just your German approach? What was it?
Not necessarily the German approach. It's just being Gopi. And the good thing though about Gopi was whenever he was harsh, like then the round after, it was forgotten. Like he's not like the guy who's like taking his anger like with him with the next round or something. He'll shout at you. He'll make sure that you know what you fucked up. Sometimes in a bad way. Sometimes it will actually make you tilt and stuff. And also I would say that sometimes it was too bad because you will be afraid of making mistakes in bigger games and stuff where also pressure is on top of you. But yeah, it was rough with Gopi, to be honest. But it was never like that you fear him or something, because in the end he will like speak to you in a normal way, whether it's after the game or after the round, because after the round it's obviously sometimes hard with freeze times and stuff, but mostly after the game he will then explain you that he's not actually mad at you, but it's also his emotions that he's carrying with him. And on top of that, he's the in-game leader. Sometimes he gets really frustrated if several things don't work out, and he knows that if everything would have been played correctly, that it could have changed the outcome of the round. But yeah, I think you have to have a healthy way of criticizing your players. I think it's necessary to do it, but the players also should not be like afraid of you being like of them being always scolded and stuff. With each mistake they make, that they get like scolded and whatever. So I think you have to find a healthy way of how to talk with your teammates. And like Ruggah said, there are certain players that you have to unfortunately sometimes touch with gloves. And so yeah, I don't know. For us, it wasn't like really too bad, and also we learned how to deal with it. That was like the most important thing for us. We knew how Gopi is, and whenever he scolds at someone, you just fucking accept it, and that's it.
I will say as well, obviously the difference there is Gopi was like a legendary player in the team when he was the in-game leader, so you can have a bit more control in that regard. He has the status to sort of earn it. That's one thing I actually also think, Ruggah, that people who are from the outside might not realise is this isn't football, it's not sports. Like every player doesn't instantly listen to everything the coach says or just immediately respond to everything. Like you're also like winning them over, right? You're like building the relationship, right?
Yeah, it's a lot like that, and that's also why when I have my approach to like this positive environment with constructive criticism, that I think half of it also comes from the players, kind of the football approach again, that they also have their own kind of like locker room approach to each other, where they also go at each other to a certain degree to make sure this is the standard we want to aim for, this is what we accept, this is what we don't accept. That also makes it easier for me to put out the direction we want to move in. If they take care of some of the small stuff themselves, then I can go at some of the bigger problems and be a bit more decisive voice in making sure we move in that direction set.
Right, obviously, when it's an active player of yours, I want to be really careful how we approach this and don't like make anyone feel upset or hurt feelings or whatever. So I'll just ask quite open-endedly, what is it like working with Dexter in that regard? Because as I say, to me, just the fact that he's coming from a different region, I think people are looking past that. Like, to me, I actually think FaZe has tricked so many people in the world. I think it's easy to make a mega multinational roster and that, like, everyone's just... I don't think people realise that's arrogant, mate. That's not just, like, putting 5 players in a room and they just automatically know each other. So, to me, I think it's a lot of people, you'll notice this last 6 months, because of the Kindata Liquid move and Dexter, your team, they all talk like everyone should just take all these CIS talents. It's like, I think it's a lot trickier to like integrate these players than people think.
think the biggest problem is probably the difference in playstyle. Because if you take Dexter as a person and how he expresses himself, he's actually pretty straightforward. He is straight out of the bag. There's no Captain Hindsight. It's like what he says is what he feels and what he means. And he has a very good understanding of how to approach people in ways that make sense. So even though, let's say he does interviews where he says something that might seem harsh, it's never with a bad intent. He's actually a very nice human being. Regarding the difference in these type of like styles from different regions, if you look at the CIS style, they're very famous for playing very slow, playing very individually. Clutches, if you take Cloud9 as an example, right? They split up all over the map, and then at one point they find a common agreement on where they want to go, and then Shiro is still going to the opposite side with the bomb, right? So if you try to include that into, like, let's say, a more Western or Scandinavian approach, where you or even German, where you play together from start to the end, this takes time to kind of align with the rest of the team. And I think that's also one of the reasons, as you said, like why FaZe has tricked everyone into thinking international CS teams is the easiest thing in the world. But at the end of the day, there are still like an adjustment period or time, at least if you don't have these like superstar players that just says, okay, I'm multi-killing here, do whatever you want, right? Because that's also the luxury that FaZe has.
What do you think on this, Leggy? I know you've got thoughts on this topic of like the international approach, because obviously Big themselves have constantly been back and forth between the two, and it's like there's pros and cons to each approach, right?
I mean, in the end, it really comes up. It does. For me personally, it doesn't really matter too much from where the region people from what regions they come. The team has to click, and everyone has to share like the same values and share like the same perspective of how the future should look like in 6 months, one year, whatever. And I also think it's like a big part of the coaches team to make sure that everyone is obviously on the same page and everything. I don't know. For me personally, I've played with both full German lineups and international lineups. I think both have kind of pros and cons. Also, let's say you have a player from CIS region, you can implement also their game style into your game. If your coach obviously who understands then how to mix those play styles together, it can also benefit you. But also, if I want to say something like, it's sometimes, let's say, for example, Dexter. He's playing a role that he's just kind of for himself, and it's much harder for the other players to play. So it's always easier for him to judge other things because he's just most of the time like doing his thing, kind of. Where other players like have to always like think about the team, so you always get into more problems or issues or mistakes in the game. So I don't know, but I personally, how I met him, I think he's a super good person. I don't think he has anything bad in his soul. So I don't know, maybe it's also the way how he expresses himself due to not the perfect English, or I don't know. But when we talk about like the lineup, I don't think it matters too much whether it's international, just pure one nation in one team. I think you can make both work. Both have their pros and cons, I think. Like for example in Germany, if I build a German lineup, full German lineup, there's a lot of egos who try to like prove themselves, trying to be better one than the other. And if you have a European team, maybe everyone is just going for one goal. And in Germany, it could be, if you have like a lineup with 5 Germans, it's often that it happens that people want to put their teammates in the shadow just to be the best German player, let's say. So I think both have pros and cons.
Okay. One thing that must be different as well in this particular lineup, ruggah, is that if we look at the past OG lineups, first of all, when it was the AlexiB era, you had like a strong in-game leader who had a sense how the game was going to work anyway. And then also a lot of those players were like younger players or like not like giant personalities. Like I get the sense that if you look at someone like Mantu, for example, he's a very different personality to Dexter, right? Dexter is more like, it's like the star player and you got, I'm sure there's more negotiation, right?
I think maybe not negotiation, but explaining why different layers to his game or doing something different in certain situation is more about understanding from multiple like standpoints, you know? Because as you say, when you are the star player, you have this mentality that when you go into a battle, you need to feel like everything you do is the right thing, you know? So sometimes we need to challenge each other's point of view a bit. And also, as you say, Legija, right, that it goes back and forth. It's not just me saying to him, okay, this angle, maybe next time when this happened, blah, 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 you can do this, right? Or have this handling with your smoke. But it also goes the other way for me listening and saying, okay, I don't need my smoke here. I'm just going to kill him, and then I'm going to think about handling, you know? So it goes both ways when it comes to star player mentalities. And also, like, quickly touching upon Mantu, like, Mantu was the perfect soldier, right? And also, as we talked about a lot with him, there was also worlds where he was never, like, never cut from the team, because he was also very, very good. There was just another benchmark that we needed to hit, and when Dexter was available, I think it was hard not to try at least and see how it would go with Dexter.
Sure. If we'll talk about some other players now, so one thing, I mentioned him there, he's not in the team anymore, obviously, he's AlexiB, who now, since then, went to G2 and then now is in NIP, obviously. Right, this is someone where I know a little bit, because luckily, when I did Blast and Flashpoint, I literally got to hear the comms, so I've actually heard him comm a bunch of games, which is very unique. I have to say it's quite cool compared to just guessing what other people are like or from stories. So give me your take, Ruggah. What was it like to work with this guy? What type of an IGL is he?
I think he's a very modern IGL that knows what he wants as soon as the round starts. I think he was also good at adjusting along the way. I think some sort of mix between Glaive and Kerrigan. I think at some points he sacrificed himself a bit too much to get that view going for him. Also why he had like very highs and very like low lows individually. So I think the whole package was there. I think he had some problems getting it all like mixed together, at least in OG. I think where he landed now in NIP could be very good for him. I think the way he thinks of the game, the pace and everything he wants to play with, like very, let's call them dynamic players. I think they fit AlexiB's playstyle a lot. I think when he was leading the team, I think we had pieces that wanted to think more for themselves. And I think that probably was also one of the reasons why it never really clicked in the end. We have heard the same story about being on the same pace, right? Too many cooks in the kitchen, all this type of stuff. And at the same time, he was also a guy that wanted a lot of authority. So it was also hard to kind of, let's say, digest it in a way where everyone felt comfortable and could move along the same direction and focus on winning. Because I think he is a very good in-game leader, but I also think the pieces around him was probably not doing their parts the best to make him look good either. And then mix in that I think he was also searching a bit for how he wanted to play on both sides. Like I think the T side, he was also very modern, like knowing the meta and everything. But on CT side, I felt like he found his footing for us. Like he tried to be the anchor, he tried to be the rotation, he tried to be kind of in the star player position, but it never really clicked, whether it was because of international teams or just seeing the game a bit different. I actually don't know to this day, but I still have some very good memories with him, and I really like Alexi as a person.
What's your thoughts on Aleksib LEGIJA? Because obviously he can be a bit of a controversial people. Some people think he's like bad or something. I don't fucking know what people think, mate. I would just say he's underrated, by the way.
Underrated? Yeah, I think too. I think perfect what Ruggah actually said, and it makes a lot of sense. Let's say when he had this NC team, apart from Alu, who is like this I don't give a fuck guy, kind of everybody knows that, he had like his 3 young players, so everybody followed his philosophy, everybody was listening to him, and he was like what you said, what didn't work in OG, with the players wanting to make their own decision, everything. I think it makes sense that it fits like his style, because with NC he had huge success with a way weaker team like individually. So I think if you would have had him now, for example, I think with these players that you have, it would make a lot of sense. Not to take credit away from Nexa, but he is the classic IGL, and I think if he gets like the authority, is it the right word? Yeah, I guess. Yeah. From all the players and full trust of them, and if he has these young players that he can teach and show them the way he wants to play the game, I think he could be a very, very good in-game leader, and I still think that he can bring any team to the top 5. And I think that he's individually even not that bad as most people even put him to be. I think he had great games. He has games where he really shows off, but as you said, he has his highs and very low lows. So if he finds stability in that, I think he can really make a team great. I don't know, to be honest, if it's going to work out with NIP, because in the past, I don't think they were like the kind of were, but not really the most structured team, in my opinion. So I don't know if it's gonna clash with his playstyle. But if everyone has full faith in him and trust him, and makes him and follows his leading, I think they can actually become a good team.
I can see what you mean about LEGIJA in the sense that if people don't know, the majority of the best Swedish teams of all time really were almost like, it'll sound rude to say it, but it almost was like POG CS. Like they just do a default, and then the joke was, they think this is just the way you play CS. It's like, bro, that's what you do if like Olaf Meister's there and fucking Flusher's there, and like, they're just the greatest players ever, you idiots. Like, that's not a style of play. So the flaw I always thought was exactly when you make a team like this, like younger players and people who haven't all been to the top. So that's why I could see both sides of LEGIJA. I could see the angle where maybe they won't like as as much. But I also think on Rogger's point, like, these aren't players who are going to be like put it this way, already said, I've heard the comments before. The most notorious lineup was the one where it was like NBK would be giving his thoughts. Even Valde would say some shit like, oh, what about this? And it's like, there's like 3 people doing that. And then on the side, Issa would just be saying stuff as well. Like, I'm going to go out long and like, and it's not a joke. I've for real heard AlexiB many times just be like, okay, everyone shut up, right? And just so you could call like whatever he's going to call.
The thing is also people don't underestimate a lot how hard the life of the IGL is. Like whenever like things don't work, you have to imagine you have like sometimes 6-7 precs a day. You have to call the whole time, and let's say 3 or 4 out of them are just a little bit chaotic. This guy's not listening. I can imagine like Nico being back then super crazy and joking a lot around, just how I know him. So I think it gets also into your mind, and it's not that easy. You won't sleep at nights and stuff. It's hard, I think, for IGL. So you really, really have to fully trust your in-game leader to get the best out of him. If not, then it's just gonna be hard for him. Unless he just accepts the fact and says, "Okay, fuck it. Coaches give me every time a game plan. I call according to that, and then you deal with the players." This is kind of how I do it. I give my players the way of how I want to play the game. I scold with the in-game leader if he doesn't, how do you say it, bring it on the table like how I want it. And if we lose, I take the blame. That's it. It's okay. And then he is out of the trouble, let's say, so he can live in peace afterwards. And I just have to deal with all the criticism. So it's fine for me. I don't know.
What about that then, Rog? A similar scenario for you then. Like, how do you, when you had Aleksib, for example, what was the division of labour? How did you work together as a team? Because actually, like I've mentioned many times on past episodes, he was someone where sometimes it's funny that in the game, people look at his style with like the way that the calls are. They see that he calls it. So you remember when he went to G2, everyone was like, oh, he's going to micromanage everything, which obviously was an exaggeration. But what's funny is when I actually heard him on comms, I actually thought he didn't manage it off. I thought sometimes he did let him sort of talk over him a bit. And like I say, it was when it was the big moment is when he'd be like, right, shut up now. But like he definitely wasn't like a tyrant on the comms. So like, how did he manage it when he used to be back in the team with him?
I think, as I also mentioned, right, like he always demanded a lot of authority and ability to lead the team in his image. And it also goes kind of along with how I actually got into OG, kind of as the last piece. And when you come in as the last piece after the players, it's always like hard to really shake the boat because the power is already ultimately laid elsewhere, you know? So I think in that image, I think he did very good in terms of understanding how he wanted to play, how he wanted to prepare. I still think it was a bit random at times because he was still very young dealing with international teams. And if you want that kind of authority, you need to be very structured. And especially if you're not talking your like native language, I think sometimes you can like bang your head against the wall trying to fix something, even though at a lot of times it could also be fixed by giving like, I would say, power and authority to someone else. And I think that was probably one of the obstacles he had when leading OG, also because it was his first international team, that I felt like coming in as the last piece, I tried to adjust and do my best to help him. But at the end of the day, it also means that he needs to ask for help in the stuff that he was not so good at. So, but I think at the end of the day, like he did a very good job over the time he was in OG. I still think he could have given more responsibility away from him, but I think that goes for every coach that is not ultimately building the lineup themselves, that it's always hard to really change things once things are set into motion. And I also look back at that time a lot of times thinking, okay, what could I have done different to help him? What could I have done to make the team successful? And at the end of the day, I think we got a lot of like close to the maximum out of the teams we had. I would also say if it was the first iteration, had COVID not hit, we probably would have had like more data to understand how good was the team, how high could the peaks be, but also understanding whether we needed to change or not. So with the first group of players, I think we got a bit unfortunate, but ever since then, we tried to build the image of the team like together, me and Alexi, I would say. And I think a lot of decisions since then was kind of us trying to find the way for OGB to be successful, kind of in his way of leading the team, I would say.
By the way, just before we leave like the current line, but I should obviously ask you a little bit about Nexa actually, because I mean technically none of us know, right? Like I heard him a brief bit when he was in like the other G2 or whatever when they switched to the English lineup with Kenny S and that. But I didn't. All I'll say is in that team there wasn't much calling, mate. That was just people like you can imagine, like Kenny S just ran away, spot and shot people, like fucking hunt away wherever he wanted. It wasn't super tactics for small Bradway. I even famously said like when I heard their comms, that was a team where it's like, how are they winning the game though? Like it was almost like those NA Pog jokes of like, you know, like just people talking all over each other. So I don't actually know what he's like in the later G2 where it was the Hunt Nico Ward or in your team. What's Nexa like to work with? What's his like philosophy as an IGL, would you say?
Nexa is a very like, he wants to give a lot of responsibility and freedom to the players. I think also Flames, as soon as the change happened, was out praising him a lot because as a player, you always go back and forth between two styles, right? A lot of structure or a lot of freedom. And I think for some players, that style is very beneficial. I would also say it's what a lot of teams trying to, at least I would not say the last major, but the majors before and the time in between, that was kind of how teams were built, right? That you want to build teams where you put in big names and give them responsibility of making like their own success, you know. And I think in that image, Nexa is probably one of the best, if not the best, if you don't think of like Kerrigan into the equation, of actually giving the players like very clear definition of what he expects of them, because he is a guy that likes to like put the pieces together once the round develops, and he's actually very smart, which a lot of like outside players or analysts don't actually know about him. He's very smart and sees the game in a very high level, which I haven't really experienced, I would say, since MSL. That he has this like low-key understanding of, okay, what does this smoke mean in front of me? How do we play around it? What does this map control mean for me?
Is he better at that than Lexi?
I think so, yeah.
Just in this area?
Yeah, I think so. I think Aleksib probably is better at managing the whole team at one given time, where Nexa can kind of give out the freedom, and then as it appears, he collects the pieces, and then we go, you know?
Right.
And it's not for every endgame leader. Like, I also think a guy like Gob would have a very hard time dealing in this system where everyone basically can go wherever they want, right? Obviously with limitations, and then at one point need to collect the pieces. And then we cannot underestimate either that he's a very, very good individual. So the kind of style will also mean that when you enter a bomb site, he will never be the first guy because he's basically adapting to someone. So he basically has the old config role under MSL, basically coming in, sweeping, and then all of a sudden he's in the clutches too. Because I think that's an element that you don't think of too much when you look at these international teams. But one thing that Nexas is very good at is also clutching, right? So if you have this in-game dealer that can put the pieces together with very skilled individuals, putting himself into a lot of clutches because he comes as second, third, or fourth guy, is actually very good for him. Because let's be honest, also in our team, we don't have the best of clutchers. So in our system, it really, really helps when we have this style. And I would also say it's a very good way of educating the individuals, that there's the freedom, but you, in your position, you need to know what the fuck you want to do. If you're like not knowing your shit, bro, we're gonna lose. But it also means that you can influence the round in ways that benefit you yourself and what you do good, instead of having one guy telling you, okay, go here, do this, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the day, you end up with a duel that you lose every single time because you feel shit doing it, right? So I think the style is very, I would say, modern generation minded, because a lot of players that comes up, that watches a lot of like, let's say these like analyst video clips on YouTube. Okay, why is this guy doing that? These guys that understands and wants to be educated, they'll have a big advantage to the guys that needs to be told what to do 24/7. So it's actually not only a successful style if you have great individual players, but it's also a style that Nexa likes to lead to kind of educate the players. And that also means for us coaches is very easy and understanding how do you help the players.
What do you think, LEGIJA?
Question. Yeah, I have a quick question. Let's say you have a team like, and now I think we have a good comparison with Heroic. If you have a team like you have now, for example, with OG, super young players, nobody has like played on the highest level, has won like some tier 1 tournaments, and I can now compare like these teams with like the Heroic back then, 2-3 years ago, whenever they started. I don't know, when was it? 3 years ago after Flashpoint, 2 years. How long do you give a team like that time to become a winning team? Because let's say I think, or I'm assuming that OG is a organization that wants to win at one point or be at the top on one point. And how long do you think it takes for a team like that time to actually get everything in? Also, obviously, it's experience that you have to gather from other tournaments that you play. Yeah.
I would say maybe I can put it into like our current situation. Maybe that makes it a bit easier to understand. But basically this year, or let's say post player break, was about establishing how good we are right now and making sure that we peak at the stuff, a sneak peek at the stuff we want to go at and wants to achieve. So saying, okay, we made Blast finals, we made the major, we made Blast World finals, right? So next year, obviously, we're gonna set the bar a bit higher because now we know this is the level we want to be at. Now we need to push it, right? And that's also from the management, the expectations being set for the new year to come, that now we're not just going to be satisfied qualifying for, let's say, like Blast finals and going out as 7th to 8th. Now we need to take it a notch up and notch up and notch up. That's basically what I've been told also in terms of like my expectations and results for the team. And at the end of the day, it's a competition business. So if I don't make anything happen the next year, I'm probably not leading the OG team. But at least now, compared to earlier, as we also quickly mentioned, now I'm actually the guy controlling everything from start to finish, right? Whereas earlier, I was the last piece coming in. It was not the players I picked out. It was not my philosophy. But now we're at a point in time where if we not perform in the next year, it's on my shoulders. So obviously you say winning, but at the end of the day, it's also hard in CSGO environment
Absolutely.
to overtake FaZe and Navi and these boys. So I would say maybe not winning, but consistently moving up, being positioned to win tournaments. That is probably the expectations for the coming year. And it's gonna be hard, but I believe in my players.
I mean, obviously Counter-Strike is super stacked, and I think the scene is incredibly hard, and it's so hard to win tournaments. But one more question about Nexa. When you guys remade the new roster, was there any questions about him being IGL or not, or did he actually want to or did he say straight from the beginning, I want to be IGL,
just been
or
a player?
or did you guys consider a different in-game leader?
He was only supposed to be an in-game leader.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Okay. By the way, does that imply, Roger, you actually picked the players for this team? This lineup? Ah, okay.
Yep.
What can you give us just some brief thoughts on why you picked these specific players then? Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Like, for me, the Dexter one was obvious. I mean, everyone saw him at the semi-finals of the major. He looked awesome. I would even say the Neo Frag one, if people just saw it as well. The Fiku one's a surprise to me. But I never thought this guy was going to be that good. But it seems like he's overperformed, if anything.
Yeah, like, we can start with Fiku, right? Obviously, age, hunger, and individual skill was very high on my to-do list in terms of scouting the talent. I also used our famous boy Kakafu also to get a lot of insights to how he saw the players and what type of things to look out for. But at the end of the day, I felt like we needed skill, and I have known Fiku's name for actually quite some time. Even when he was younger, I think he appeared on the scene as 16-year-old with Ego, and even then he was making waves, at least in practices. I could see it was not consistent, but you saw the glimpses there, kind of. You see these raw talents every now and then you think, okay, this guy can headshot, and then he feeds the next 3 rounds, and you're like, what's happening, right? But then you take a closer look, and I was actually very impressed with him. Not only on the demo scouting, but also what type of person he is, because he was very schooled in Ego. They have actually a very good program in terms of getting players ready, kind of like what we see in the Danish ecosystem when you had the top dog, you have the lower. So they basically got more and more experience and got more education in the brain when they went up the ranks. Same thing a bit with Ego. They just made it astrally light, I would say, giving the sports psychologists, making sure they knew nutrition and all this stuff. So basically what we got, which I was very surprised about, was a guy that basically is not nervous. He's 18 years old. He's not nervous. He's very educated in terms of what outside factors means for his performance. He's basically the perfect soldier, just waiting for someone to tell him what to do, and he'll jump for you. And then you add on top of it that he is a very hard worker that really wants to grind and be better in his positioning. So you actually get the full package of a young talent coming up. So for him right now, it's more a matter of being consistent and doing it, because we constantly see also at different tournaments that he can do it at a very, very high peak. Like the RMR was probably the best showcase I've seen for a young player in a very long time. Basically banged everyone out of the waters, including outsiders who basically went on to win the whole thing, right? So yeah, with Fico, that was kind of the thing with him. With neofrag, I think basically if you know anything about CS in either tier 1 or tier 2, you knew he was the guy lurking under that everyone had their eye out for. He was a pain in the ass practicing against, pain in the ass playing official against, because kind of with like Fiku, he doesn't give any fucks. He just goes at you and don't care if it's like 15-14 or if it's 7-1, right? He does his thing and he is very, very skilled. And the thing about him is that the more pressure that comes on everyone else, the more he tries to take advantage of it. And that's very unique, at least coming from a Danish perspective, where let's not make any mistakes, let's play very smart, let's wait for pushes, and then all of a sudden this guy appears out of 3 smokes and shoots you in the back, and you're like, what the fuck happened, right? So yeah, and then of course his numbers, I think he was like top 10 on IGL IQ for the last 2 years in a row or something. But yeah, he also needs to adjust to our style, because back then when I asked him, oh, what role did you have in Sinners? Yeah, I was this guy entering, and then you pick up the demos and then you basically see B-Stick basically creating room for him and then him sweeping in and killing 2 behind her, right? So yeah, he also needs to adjust to our style okay. where he needs to think and do stuff on his own. But I'm very happy because he's also a very hard worker, so it's hard to be negative about these things, but he needs to learn it also at a tier 1 level, basically like Fico.
By the way, one thing I want to ask is, what was it like for you to go to an international team? Because obviously you're not just coming just from the Danish team, which is notorious for having all the structure and people come up like sports style. They've played under Hunden and all the Barry and all those guys on the way up. But also the 2 IGLs you'd worked with, Snappi and MSL, are like probably the 2 of the most classical style of IGLs with the old, almost not literally, but almost the from spawn tactics, right? So what was it like coming and working with all these different nationalities in a different project?
I actually think it was very refreshing for me. You can very quickly, LEGIJA probably also knows well, get stuck in your own way of thinking because of the teams you've been in, and everyone else thinks the same in the teams also from the same region or even country, right? So it's a breath of fresh air that all of a sudden you get a new perspective on things. All of the stuff you have like thought was automatics in your teams, now you need to rediscover them with a new team. Also having the different like cultures, maybe different type of in-game leaders that had other focus areas where you normally had like different ones in your Danish teams. So I think it was actually very refreshing. It also took some time for me to adjust, I gotta be honest. I think the first 2 months I was dreaming in English, which is very crazy for a guy that's not English, you know, but it's because all of a sudden you start switching your language from day-to-day basis. I was talking more English than Danish because I had these like 8 to 10 hour work days, right? So I think it took some time, but ultimately I was very happy doing it. Also because you break down some of these like normal automatics that you have in normal teams, that you can basically say, okay, now we need to find a compromise or we need to do something different. Whereas in Danish teams, or I would say probably the same in German, that you have one direction and this is the way, and if everyone jumps outside, we fucking kick that bitch, right? So everything, you open up your perspective a lot more working in international teams, I would say.
LEGIJA, I've got a question for you. I don't know if you remember this, because to be fair, it was at an after party. So all I'll say is, like, look, we are all in the most sober state of mind. We remember everything. But I'll see if you remember it or not. Do you ever remember when you were trying to flame me for, like, overrating MSL?
Alone, yeah.
Yeah, do you remember this? So I want to ask you is this. What is your take on MSL LEGIJA? Do you think he's overrated?
I actually think he's good. Do you know Synderen from Dota?
Yes.
Okay, I think he's exactly like Synderen, kind of. He's the perfect guy to create a structure in the team, to get everything going, but at one point you reach a level where the team will often probably say, okay, time to replace him. And that's like the unfortunate thing. Because I don't know him personally, I've never really played with him, but judging from how he played and how his team played in the past, with the players that he had, I think he was an excellent in-game leader. But I think... these days, I think you need to be individually skilled more than you used to have to back then. So I think he can get the team to a certain level, certain point, but I don't know if he can bring a team to winning. And I think Kerrigan is the only guy I think that can actually make it. Even though he doesn't have like always the best performances, but his performances in the server is also different because he's actually the guy who's creating space a lot for you, and it will also have a huge impact into his individual skills. So I think he can bring it to a certain level, but at one point I think it's going to be too hard, just by the competition that you have today. And also, it's not anymore this Counter-Strike that you used to play back then. It's so diverse. There's so many different styles that you have to play. Because back then, you have to imagine, there was always teams invited to all the tournaments. You always had like the 4, 5, 6 teams that you were always watching how they play, and then you copy their style. So the meta was kind of one-dimensional. But these days, there's like so many different play styles. You have outsiders who are fucking pain in the ass to play, super slow, always annoying. Every time you want to do something, they punish every mistake. But then you have the other aggressive teams that play. So there's like, the game has changed a lot than it was back then.
What do you think on this, Ruggah? Come on, hit me with the MSL response.
I actually think that he gets a lot more hate than he deserves. I actually think he's one of the smarter guys that we've had in CSGO for a very long time. And funny enough, I actually think he is a mini Gob in a lot of ways. I think the reason why he never got the recognition of a Gob, obviously because he wasn't a bigger profile, but he had a lot of the same aspects to how he handled things, how he structured things, the feedback he gave to players, but at the same time, always trying to innovate himself. I think the only problem MSL had was that he sometimes needed to bang his head through the door 10 times before he realized if he was on the wrong path, you know?
Yes.
And that's also where my working with him was also like in the beginnings, always when we found something that worked, very easy, we knew how to adjust. But then when we hit the wall or the dead end, trying to redo things was very hard, because when you're an in-game leader that wants that much structure, that much way of doing things, it can be hard for you to scratch it and start over. But I think he should, if anyone, deserve to get a chance. If not as a player, then at least as a coach at a very big address, because I think he has one of the biggest brains and know how to make things easy for players to understand. And I think that's a tool that a lot of other players or in-game leaders don't have, to make your thoughts like well represented so others can understand you.
I think I would combine what both of you are saying, actually, because I definitely agree, by the way. Like, pretty sweet. I would just say outright, I've known him quite a long. He's quite a stubborn guy. Like, even when you talk to him, he's one of those people who just loves to argue. Like, he's not even choosing to do it. That's just how he talks. Like, if you say one thing, he disagrees. He's not going to like wait. It's just going to be like, nah, I disagree, man. Like, and so for example, when LEGIJA said there, essentially LEGIJA said, it's obviously true, isn't it? He's not a very good fragger. Like, that's going to be a problem in some of his teams, right? I can already tell you, LEGIJA, you won't believe this, but MSL would even immediately disagree and be like, I won an MVP. Like ARPing against Divine. He'd bring that fucking story out of the attic again for the millionth time. And also, I also agree, Ruggah, that is basically one of the main things I think has held him back. Because I even think there's a logic to it. Like, when you're starting the team and you have to establish everything, and especially sometimes he's working with younger players and players who haven't blossomed yet, it can be really good to give them all the structure. They don't have any. Some of them, they come out of FPL or just playing fucking Pogs or something. So it can be really good when you're the guy who knows everything, you're always right. But I think it's actually a bit of what Gay's talking about. I think that's why when you get to the absolute top, though, and you have bigger names and people expect you to just outright win now, yeah, it can be. I think he is someone who's it's been harder for him to adapt and sometimes move with the times and even what I was joking about, even give up doing that ARPing. Like, it worked for a brief while, but it was never. He really did think, by the way, I'm not joking. He thought that could be like a permanent solution, didn't he?
Yeah, he 100% did. But I do want to say it was the wrong time at the wrong era. Because if you put him, now I don't want to build up an MSL ARPing storyline, but if you put him back into right now, I actually think the style he would play as an ARP fits the meta like straight on, right? Look at all the ARPers having success right now. It's laid back control ARPers that really just punishes like the stupid moves or outplay strats. And if there's one guy that knows all the strats in the world, it would be that guy, right? But obviously, like, he's not shooting as hard, and I think he made a mistake going die hard with the AWP back then. I even encouraged him to it because we needed an in-game leader that could also AWP in our team back in OpTic. But I still think he had some relevance still, and I think he still do. But it obviously requires the right 4 people around him, because I don't think he's gonna grind out with 4 big talents all the way up through the rankings. But if you give him a team that has a slot in EPL and Blast, I wouldn't be surprised if he still made the occasional like deep runs at tournaments.
Sure.
I have a quick question. Do you think it would have... Okay, let's say Gopi, MSL, all these classic in-game leaders from back then who like have their own way kind of how to play. Because that I compare like today with myself now in this team that I play, or coach, and let's say big. Back then you were, if you have like a Gopi or a Tapson who's like super experienced and know a lot of stuff, back then it sounds stupid, but you felt a bit like a bitch. You were just doing their job, you know. He tells you do this, you do it. He tells you do that, you do it. But these days, for example, for me, I let my players, everyone focus, do your thing. You make sure that you are individually on point. My in-game leader will have to know, obviously, what's his philosophy and what ideas and how I want to play the game. But I am preparing all the things that I want, and I will play it the way I want to. So back then, I don't know. I think those players or those classic in-game leaders from back then would have benefited a lot if they actually had an in-game leader or a coach, that could give them the direction and do the job that they did outside of when other players were playing FPL or deathmatch or whatever, and they had to put like 3 or 4 hours time into watching demos and whatever. I think this is the job from a coach. And those in-game leaders back then could have taken much more time into practicing their individual stuff. That's why I think also today these in-game leaders or the coaches today have much more authority, because there is not that many experienced players like you had back then. Now all the experienced players that you had back then are coaches now. And those little kids, you cannot argue with me. You have played 2 years a game. How do you want to argue with me? How do you want to know more things than I do? Obviously, do you have some ideas that I can bring into my game? Of course, you can bring them up. But I think like back then, those in-game leaders were too experienced and had to put like too much time into the tactical aspect of the game rather than just being more focused on individual gameplay. That's why I think also today there is much more better individually in-game leaders that hit also.
I have a follow-up question then. Do you think time traveling back that would still be gob calling? Because I have a very set-eyed understanding about like a guy like MSL, right? If you do this for that guy, now his calling will also be heard by him not controlling everything, right?
So the problem is I didn't have the experience that Gob had, so I couldn't. I had to be like the guy who does the things that he tells me to do. I didn't have the experience. But now these days, that's what I'm saying. Now these days, you have these young talents, like your team, for example, you and Karkov, who you have experience. You can now shift the team how the fuck you want. And the Nexa will listen to you. And you don't have like this MSL or this Gobi who says, this is the way I want to play. You do all the work for me that you have to do, and that's it. Now I have the authority. I can, because what is my job? My job is only to do like watch games, prepare for opponents, make sure that my game plan is perfect. I don't have anything else to do. I don't have to go and play deathmatch. I don't have to go and play ranks or whatever. That's why I think like today it's much better for coaches to be, or coaches have much more authority these days, because there is just too many new players. Because you have, how much experience you have? You have probably like 15 years experience in Counter-Strike.
It's resource as well, yes.
Yeah. So it's crazy how much more experience you have compared to a Fiku, Neofrag. I don't know. They're like, how old are they? 20, 21, 19, 18? I don't know. So what can they tell you? So it's in your hand. You put all the time in that you have to into the strategical part of the game, and they can just focus much more now on the individual stuff. But back then it was super hard.
It was very hard. I agree.
By the way, one area I would even say, I've always thought, this is why when people on Reddit, etc., all think MSL's just like crap or whatever, I always just think, it's a bit coincidental, isn't it? That I've never seen a single player who ever played in an MSL team, who even as a joke with trash talking implied he was a bad IGL. I've never ever seen it anywhere, ever, any interview ever. Like, the joke is, this is the difference between just looking at the game, and I'm just going to say it, like, I don't give a fuck. If someone's a pleb, you don't understand Counter-Strike. I always say this, you're an idiot at a fairground watching the fireworks. Just enjoy the... Oh my can't. You don't know tactic. You don't know the fuck they're doing. You don't know what space creation is or how that AWPer got to kill the two people there. You think he just went out and shot people in the head like it's a matchmaking game? Like, no. So what I would say is this. I get why a fan doesn't understand, but all I'll say is this. If you are in an MSL team, it's like Ruggah says, he's watched all the demos. You're not going to beat him in an argument. Like, he's going to, if you say, well, what about this then? He's going to go, no, but this team does it like they rotate this. You're going to have nothing if you're a player. Like, you're just going to go, okay, the boss, and do it. Like, he actually has that status. There's a reason why his teams on some level work. But the problem is, I agree, Ruggah. When I look at the teams, like, look, I'd like him to be an IGL again. Sorry, MSL, I'll retweet that tweet every 3 months that you put up. But the problem is, no one's fucking responded anymore. So I even agree with you, Ruggah. He's the most obvious, ever since, like, God be in fucking existence, this is the most obvious person who should become a coach I think I've ever seen, mate. Like tomorrow he could start being a coach.
It's actually ridiculous.
You know, he'd still have to learn some of the social aspect just of coaching, but mate, the mind's there for the game, isn't it? Like, he'd be brilliant as a coach, wouldn't he, Ruggah?
100%. Like, the irony is that I taught him how to play Counter-Strike. He brought me back as a coach, and now I'm basically saying, okay, guys, it's time, right? Okay. But yeah, he has a very smart mind for the game. And I think maybe we talk about the guy who is persona non grata in Hunden, right? But I still think MSL beats his tactical mind, like, by far. So I think it's a very, very easy pickup if there is any team that wants to either build or something else, because he is very good and he's very smart in his way of approaching the game. And as I said already, that he understands how to explain his mind, you know. And a lot of coaches and in-game leaders, players as well, have a very hard time doing this in a matter where people actually understand, instead of just saying, yeah, it's fine, I'll go do it. And then they die and they're like, why did I even do it? But he understands how to get the context there as well.
Right, in the teams, both OpTic and North, you had a player I definitely want to talk about. It's one of the most notorious players right now in the world, of course, k0nfig, right? And here's the key thing. You had k0nfig right I know now everyone's going to say now's the period where he's out of control because of the drama. You had him when, in theory, though, the real stories I've all heard Ruggah behind the scenes like this. Put it this way, you know when he got kicked from North and everyone did that stupid meme like, MSL just kicks everyone who's good. It's like, bro, all you need to know is even k0nfig agrees with that kick. Like, the behind the scenes stories you can imagine from these stories now, the sort of how he might be. So what I would ask is this is the period when simultaneously some of the outside of the game stuff's a bit wild, but fucking hell is this guy good at Counter-Strike, though, he's such a player. So what's it like to deal with a player like this, Ruggah? It seems like a very interesting character.
He's a very interesting character, and it's just that he even probably agrees with the kick himself. The follow-up thing is it probably got me and k0nfig kicked as well. Yes. So maybe that is not the highlight of my k0nfig talks, at least, but yeah. He is a guy that has one of the best mechanical aims that you'll ever find. Like, even a guy like Scream, but everyone is praising for the highlights, bro. He did it how many times? Like, k0nfig can go and do it tomorrow and can do it all day if he wants to. The only thing I think that has always held the k0nfig a bit back was his involvement and commitment to the game. I also talked a lot with him, and I also think you remember the tweet you did, and he kind of went out and said, yeah, this was the eye-opener I needed. Bro, I tried to kick that door for 2 years straight, you know? Basically get him to open his eyes.
Oh, by the way, I'll just say, Ruggah, one thing I will never take credit for is I didn't, like, come up with that idea. I even say it in the article, dude. Yeah. Like, I take all quotes. Like, I said all of it. It was all your... I say it because I wrote it to k0nfig, basically. In the article, I say it. Dude, it's your teammates that all told me, like, you're the best aimer they've ever played with, but you've got all these other problems. So, yeah, no, don't worry. I don't take credit for that. To me, that's like that thing where someone's trying to get the fucking pickle jar off, and I just came in at the end and popped it, but you'd already got it, like, 3/4 of the way off. So I'll give you an assist for that one.
I think it's also how k0nfig is, right? That I think sometimes he needs someone from the outside to actually give him a reality check.
Right.
And I think if you go back in his career, you can like drop down and find these like moments along the way where he needs to reinvent himself, kind of. So I don't want to take credit because I actually don't think he cared when I said it. But sometimes you need an outside guy to kind of burst your bubble. And I think for k0nfig, that is a guy that's very outspoken, very expressed. He always likes to be social. Sometimes you just need someone from the outside to say, bro, what the fuck are you doing, right? And a lot of times it might sound harsh, but that's just reality sometimes. But if you go back to k0nfig the player, like if you put him in a system where he can use his aim, where he don't need to necessarily think too much, he's gonna shoot you off the server. And I also think if you look back at his short Astralis time, the games and tournaments when they play good was when they didn't put him in some weird ass role where he needed to do everything on his own, but create some space for him. Boom, he's there headshotting you, right? Because he's one of the best at it. But unfortunately, he have a hard time like finding the consistency in it, because you can basically see every time he shoots, his team wins. Doesn't matter who he plays for.
Yes. What do you think on this, Legia, this topic about like how you use a player like k0nfig?
I was just about to ask, like, do you suck it just in and, like, for example, keep him in Australia? Because, like, if I would be the management in Australia or the guy who makes the decision, I don't know how I could kick this guy. Regardless what shit he does, unless it's like really something absolutely crazy, and I cannot judge really how it was inside the team and how his behavior actually was. But for me, a player like that, he has to really fuck up, really fuck up to be replaced.
I know what you mean, because put it this way, I will say, based on the stories of like the things I'd heard anyway, and then what we did find out publicly, I do think like this is the problem with Counter-Strike. This is what no player wants to hear, because basically I'm about to say the world is really unfair, right? If you're a normal player, I'd kick you with a fucking heartbeat. I'd press the button, I'd eject you out the city. I'd ban you from my team forever. I'd say you'll never play again. But the problem is, this isn't just any player, like Ruggah just said. So the problem is, the second I knew they were kicking him, I remember just thinking like, look, you might get device back, you might get some really good player. You're never going to have a player like that fucking exact skill set ever again.
Okay, but imagine you get device and him.
That's the dream, right? Exactly. That's also the other thing that killed me about that, because the dream of device coming back was to have device and k0nfig and blame. Like, what the fuck? Yeah, exactly. No one wanted like one for the other. Like, you wanted them all at the same time. No, I agree. That's a bit wild. What do you think on that, Ruggah? Because obviously it's a tricky call, right? Like you say, if someone's outrageously talented, like, I mean, all I would say is just look at any sport. Like, if you are the superstar player, you can get away with stuff other people can't, but at the same time, I mean, especially for a Danish org, it is pretty wild the shit he was doing. Like,
if I can quickly add, for example, Smuya, talented player, but he fucked up and he was just annoying, and then it was enough.
Yes,
he's a replaceable guy, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Is he talented? Fuck yes, he's talented. Is he a funny guy? Yes, he's funny. But if you really destroy my team and you're not the k0nfig kind of player, then I just replace you. I'm sorry. But for a k0nfig, I would suck it in. I would have to sometimes. But obviously, I cannot. I really cannot judge like how bad it was. You know. So if it was really bad and it's like always constant problems, then yeah, either you get help for him and make sure that he somehow fixes it, or at one point you just have to give up. Yeah. But yeah, probably Ruggah knows more.
Like I would say, I don't think he's been treated harshly throughout his career with these things. I think when stuff has happened, the assessment and what had happened to him has been quite fair. So I'm not gonna like kind of build like some picture about him being the the guy that never makes mistakes or anything. But if we go back to kind of the Astralis topic, I think the only problem that k0nfig has, right, is he needs to be in action, but he should probably not be the guy controlling the action. That means in an Astralis team, that would mean someone on the team needs to sacrifice a bit for him. And if you look back on how Astralis has played throughout the last, I don't know how long time, they never really sacrifice any players. So at that point, it would probably mean that a guy like Glaive would probably have to sacrifice a bit more for k0nfig, and I'm not sure that fits the style that he wants to call, right? So at the end, like, there are some things that needs to be considered, because obviously every Dane's wet dream would be having the team you talked about earlier, right? But in reality, I don't think it would work exactly like everyone was gonna think about it, because how do you use k0nfig? Do you use him in map control, or do you use him as kind of an active lurk? And if you put him on active lurk, now again you get this like weird up and downs. That okay, he hits the peak where he hits all the right timings, outshoot them, but he will also sometimes just walk out and die to the off 3 times in a row. But if you create the room around him, give him some space, follow up behind Glaive, he's gonna shoot you to the stars, right? But if it isn't the style you're used to running, this is also gonna be a sacrifice on maybe some other players. Now it's your captain taking the hit, right? And you already have BlameF, who was not notoriously known for being super active himself either. I think he's doing a better job now, but who gives and takes, right? So I would also think k0nfig in Astralis with this lineup would be sick, but I still wanted to see them kind of make it work.
Yes, I'll touch on this actually a little bit. I'll even tie into this stand-in job he's going to do for Heroics. It makes my point for me. So basically, the problem I had when he was in this last Astralis lineup is, like you say, there was only two ways to use him. Either he was like Lurk, with the problem with that is he's also not the player. He's not a super cerebral player. You wouldn't want him to make all those decisions like you say. But the other angle you can use him is you just use him as an old school entry and you just go, right, run through a brick wall. And then if you do, it's great, we get in the round. And if we don't, you look stupid and you die and then your stats look bad. So the problem is I'll use an old school reference to make this analogy. You guys know the old 90s arcade game called Time Crisis, right? You all do, I've no doubt. The one where it's by the people who made Virtua Fighter. It's basically the one, I mean Tekken rather. It's the one where the whole premise is you're like the character in the game, you don't control him. He moves from place to place to pace and all you do is shoot people along the way. My analogy is that's what you want k0nfig's game to be. Like Ruggah's saying, what you want is, and this is why I actually think this stand-in job for Heroic, by the way. I know if you're a fan, you're thinking, oh, but Heroic was in the major final, they just won blast, like Stown was the best player, like this sucks. Like it does suck in the sense it's not the real Heroic, but I'm not joking. There's like mark this date down because it'll come out before Blast World Finals. There's like an outside chance they still win the fucking World Finals, and here's why. Because if you look at the team he's going into now, I actually think, no joke, if he's taking Stown's roles, this is exactly what we were talking about. Like if he has someone like Shush to like fucking entry with, like, dude, he's just going to clean up. Because if you're in like scenario like you're saying, someone else runs in, you know what's like, you're all going as a group, and he just comes in and his job is just shoot this guy and then this guy. That's what his skill is. That's what he's the best at. Like if he doesn't have to make all these chess move decisions or like time, and I think he's good. I think this could be like, I know it's just a one-off, but I think it's going to be really good, Ruggah.
I think so as well. I just hope it doesn't happen in the first game where we play them. But other than that, yeah, we quickly talked about it before, right? That if you basically look at Heroic, they have this like hardcore map entry with the luxury of having an AWP in-game leader, meaning you can have two more rifles in the pack, meaning you can put Tessus or whoever you want in there, and then you can have a third guy coming in just to sweep everything. And I think k0nfig, the times he's played the best in his career has been in this exact role. You look back at MSL times where he was just, okay, find them, I'll kill them behind you, right? Same thing with rushing complexity. Basically, when he's been banging out numbers, fully like basically going through the roof. So I fear a bit the first game against him, not gonna lie, because if there ever was a team and a system where he would benefit from playing in, this would probably be one of them. Because as you said, he doesn't need to talk. He just needs to show up, headshot, follow his teammates, and shoot. That's all, right? And if there's a role for k0nfig, that is the one.
So everyone says I don't know anything about CS. What do they know about 90s arcade games and how they relate to CS? Like, coming from a different perspective here, mate. You don't get this on any other show.
But bro, actually this is for k0nfig probably, or for Heroic, the best pickup you can actually have. This guy's experience, he's one of the most skilled players in the fucking world. And he will play with no pressure. He will have, and he wants to prove himself probably again.
Yes,
he wants to drop the numbers, and he has to prove himself again because he will. Life will not be that easy probably for him afterwards. But I think this is the perfect opportunity for both Heroic and for because they will play super loose, and this guy is probably, when you let him play loose, if you let him go off his leash, just let him go like a dog. Go now, bite him. This guy, motherfucker, is fucking dangerous. So I think you have a fair point that they can actually win this whole thing.
And as you're saying, even though, look, it is the World Finals and the prize money's great, like, realistically, they know it's a standing scenario. Like, they know this isn't the real lineup. So actually, that takes all the pressure off. Like, you're not,
100%.
There's no problems. You're not blaming if he does something wrong. You're just like, right, well, let's make it nice and simple for you. Do these things, then let's see what happens in the results. I actually think that's why there's a chance you do well.
It's also not like you downgrade a player.
No.
You get a very good player for a very good player. So, or often you see like, let's say take Astralis, they take Christo. I mean, I don't want to judge him too much. I didn't see too much of him, but it's not a k0nfig caliber, right? So I think it's for both teams a very good thing.
Indeed. Right, another person I want to ask about, Ruggy, is, of course, Snappi, because what's funny is, this just shows as well, by the way, again, why I'll never give a flying fuck about what people on Twitter or Reddit think about Counter-Strike, mate. And by the way, if you're a player or a coach, feel free to include me in that. But as I just said before, I do know a lot about 90s arcade games. But no, what I would say is this, right, is obviously if we went even like a year ago, right, so when Snappi was in like the not as good ends, dude, no one gave a fuck about this guy. They'd all written him off. They were like, guy's too old. He was never that good anyway. It was years ago that like the old Heroic was good or whatever. Like a lot of people actually, I think, thought he wasn't good. Whereas you've seen like the revival he had since. Like, he was the semi-finals of the major guys. Like, he's had all the successes with EPL, etc. So you had him admittedly in one of the teams where, from knowing him, I heard some of the stories that he was pretty tricky in the OpTic team. Like, it was confused as to which players you could get. And in theory, wasn't that the one where like you had to like move to America at part of the time or some weird shit like that? So it wasn't as simple as people might think if they look on like a Wikipedia. It wasn't like just a Danish team normally. But who is Snappi in the IGL? Because I know he has his own total vision on the game as well, right?
I think he's kind of a mix of all the type of ideals we talked about, right? He's not the super structured one. He's not the super loose one either. He's not sacrificing himself, and he's not taking the star position. So he's basically somewhere in between. And I think the reason why Snappi found his way of being modern right now is kind of the same kind of system and team that we have built in OT, where you pick a lot of young players, you mix them with a guy that's very experienced, that can shoot back, basically has a very like nice understanding from the game, but also knows enough to outsource some of the harder in-game later duties to the coaches. Because I think that's one of the things that when you hear Snappi talk in interviews today, he is very reliant on his coach to also make him successful. So in that regard, I think he's very modern, and I would say I was surprised that they did as good as they did with Spinks on the team. But the pieces has always been there in Snappi's teams, right? Very good at building the foundation, get individuals in that can shoot maybe above their pay grade, and then see what happens, you know? It was the same back in the Heroic when they started making waves in the Danish scene too. But unfortunately, a bit for him, again, it's like there's still another address to go to for the best players, because I think they actually had a very good team, a very good structure with the Ends team, with Spinks. And I think it got destroyed a bit when Spinks left the team. It created like a void, I would say. I would even say the players they got in are very good replacements, but it just never really clicked after. And when it comes to Snappi, it's actually one of the periods of my coaching career where I felt like, looking back, that I should probably have done something different to help that team be successful. Because again, it's one of these things where you come in as the last piece, you just go a bit along with the flow in the beginning, see what happens, and then at one point of time, you either agree with the direction set or you don't, right? So I think looking back that I should probably have done more to help him. Also because we had good players, right? But we never really got out of the contract jail, which happened in OpTic with all of a sudden players were going left, back, and center. Like k0n was loaned out from North, then he got bought, then Gate was loaned out, then he went back. Like, it was hard to really find a footing. And then I would also say I think Yugi had the worst like mental state of his career.
This is when his career was in trouble, right?
Yeah. So it was kind of a cat in the bag situation where you felt like the team on paper was very, very good, but it never really clicked. And to this day, I'm not really sure exactly what was the reasoning behind it.
Okay. By the way, when you said earlier that like Snappi isn't the IGL that'll sacrifice him, that I will say, I already gave the example of MSL before, so fans don't know. One of the interesting things about IGLs is, cause like LEGIJA said, it's so difficult to do that job, and it's such a full spectrum job that you're thinking about all the time. It's taking all this brain resources. None of them, by the way, except rare example, like maybe k0nfig would. Most of them will never admit that they're not that good at fragging, by the way. They all think like, no, if I didn't have to do this, you know, bro, you do know, like, they all think they're way better than they are. So when Snappi used to always tell me that he's like a good fragger, I always used to think like, yeah, whatever, bro, you're the IGL, shut the fuck up. But I actually have to say, when I watch him now and then, dude, he actually is a good fragger, I've got to say. The problem you have to realise is because he's not playing like star roles, the stats are never going to be amazing. But just watching the eye test, I'm telling you, if you're a fan, like, he is shooting way better than a lot of IGLs. So he's actually pretty skilled, I have to say. What do you think, Ruggah?
I completely agree. Like, I would also say he benefited a bit from the silencer, because I would say his CT sides got way better.
Yes.
But I still think he's a very good individual, and that's the thing. If you want to build a team with talents, right, and your in-game leader can also shoot back, you have a very good cocktail for upsetting a lot of teams. But I think he's very good. He even joked about being better than a lot of AWPers with the AWP too. So
there you go. See what I mean? They're all ridiculous, these IGLs, I know. Because I've always said with some of these IGLs, it's like, because MSL was the most ridiculous one back in the day. It's like, I'll give him all this credit. Like, everyone else is flaming. I'm like, no, you're really good, like, tactician, like, really smart. And he's like, and good fragger. It's like, you're not fucking good at everything, you fucking idiot. Like, just, I know, just take it. Like, everyone has flaws. Everyone's something they're not good at. Fucking whatever. By the way, along those lines, though, that's something we should talk about, because as much as, like, I don't know if Anubis is good or not. I've had thoughts about the map pool for a while. Look, there are plenty of problems already with the CT weapon, blah, blah. But I have to say, I did actually think when people talk about, like, oh, it's a bit of a boring time in CS, like, that's because the fucking CT just wins every round. Like, if people don't know, every single map was CT-sided in CSGO. Everyone, even fucking Dust 2, the most classically T-sided of all time. No map was T-sided, like the game, because the silencer's too powerful. Like, everyone knows this. As soon as they made that initial silencer buff, if you even just yourself went in a matchmaking game, you're like, this is a bit easy to spray, isn't it? Like, yeah, because you just shoot like 4 bullets at someone, they're just dead immediately. So, like, what do you think, Ruggah? Because I do think that killed a bit of, like, some of the interest of CS. It's why, actually, I do think in low key, it's quite cool that Outsiders and Heroic won these 2 tournaments, because these were teams that could actually fucking play the T side and actually kill people with AKs. Like, it became a bit boring just watching spray downs the whole time, you know. What do you think, Ruggah?
I completely agree, and it's also one of the reasons why we're a bit sad we didn't go farther at the major, because I actually think we were probably, if not the first or fourth, best T-side team. I think we actually made more routes on our T-side too, right? But I also think teams got very lazy. I would say the last 6 months, people kind of just accepted that the silencer was good and didn't like adapt at all. Like, I've seen so many Inferno games where T's tries to like shift off middle and they're just getting lasered down. Like, I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Guys, you know this as well. What is the reasoning behind this, right? So I think a lot of teams got very lazy on that regard, but I still think the silencer was too OP for too long. But it was not as OP as the AUG or Creek, and maybe that's the reason why it only came to attention just now.
Yes. What do you think, LEGIJA?
AUG and Creek was for both teams, and for side, yeah. So I don't know. I haven't really experienced the M4 myself too much. But I think it's obviously for the changes for good now, and it's kind of also not necessarily boring, but it's much better when it's like more balanced, and you just get to when skill, not necessarily skill, but also the strategical part will benefit much more into it. So I don't know. I haven't really played the meta to myself that much, so I cannot really judge, and I don't want to say wrong things.
No, that's fair enough.
Now our old guys know the spray patterns again.
There you go.
But it's boring. It's just boring to watch. Like, just when I remember myself, like this AUG and Creek time, it was super boring. And I think it's for the better now. And I think it's going to be much more lucrative again for viewers to watch the game. It's going to probably also change the meta also. Like, whenever like a big change is happening, it also means there will be likely a shift in the meta. So we will see. It's interesting times coming. Yes, also with the new map, I think it's good. So we will see.
One thing actually along the meta lines that I'd like to ask you about, Ruggah, is another thing I noticed when the economy change happened over this year, and then also obviously like the M4 being too powerful, is on CT, dude, teams just don't want to fucking eco, mate. They just won't do it. And so like everyone knows this. The last 6 months, dude, I don't think we've ever seen this many MP9s be bought ever in the history of Counter-Strike. Like, how many fucking times are people buying 5.7s and MP9s and having like 2 rifles, or like, dude, and the Oppas even buy the fucking Scout on like a real gun round. Like, because the problem I have with that approach, this is why I think in games like Counter-Strike, people, you know, you hear that thing every year, like, oh, now the level of the game is just too high and everyone understands it. It's like, that's because the game's quite static, so you can copy what other people did. But when you get these changes, actually you see like that, it takes teams a long time to figure out like what the right buy pattern is, etc. Because I thought a lot of teams, dude, did too many force buys and they would just keep losing. And the problem on CT, of course, in this meta is if you don't keep the guns, you're just losing money every fucking round because you're losing men. So I always thought, like, some teams don't realise if you did the old school, like, hard fucking proper save with just the USPs, you get back to a full economy, whereas they will sometimes throw, like, 3 or 4 gun rounds away in a CT half. What are your thoughts on this? It must be tricky because I know the players, they always want... It's like Lurpus said this years ago, but he was so right. The players will always want to force buy because in their brain it's boring to just have no weapon. And they all think of, like, the FPL round, like, oh, what if I get, like, a deagle headshot? Or what if I get the perfect range for this MP9? Like, I could get sprayed down. Like, it must be tricky to even get the players on the same page.
I think it is. We also have discussions about these like full USPs or like what do you do instead on these type of things. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of like aggro thinking or smart economy thinking, right? The aggro thinking comes, if I buy a deagle, I can snowball the round and win it, right?
Yes.
But if you take the other perspective, if you play the USP rounds, it's simple math. If you kill 3, now only takes 1 round win, and now you break the economy. So it's the never-ending discussion going back and forth between the guys that maybe killed 1 or 2 in the pistol that wants to have a deagle compared to, okay, if we just full eco, we stack somewhere, we kill 3, now we win the first round, now we control the economy again. So I think teams still haven't found out exactly where to land on this specific, but I do see the full USP ecos becoming more trendy, at least the last couple of months. And I think it's to understand that the economy is more important now than the 2 deagle kills every once in here.
Yeah. And also, dude, one thing I want to just say, if you're a player out there, guys, USP is bad if you are on your own. If you're just an individual player, like looking out of like CT window on Mirage, yeah, you're never going to get a kill on the AK guy at the top of the. But if you all push the fucking middle with the USPs and there's 3 or 4 of you, it's a nightmare being that guy with an AK. There's 3 people just dinking you all up. It's not even as bad as people think. You haven't just given up the round. Like if you have a coordinated plan, I even think you can. Look, you're not going to win most of the times, but you can get some like fucking. As you say, you can get 2 or 3 kills. You can get damage done.
And if you think that's already a win for your team.
Yeah.
Getting 2 kills on USPs only, it's a win for your team. And Gob also had a smart saying always for this. Let's say sometimes we had even, let's say we play train and they get B bomb site, and often you play like this one player on B. And like now it's a 5v4 for the Ts. You're in disadvantage. And Gob said sometimes just save 5v4. Many teams don't even consider saving at this point. But he says, guys, we just lose 1 round. It's just 1 round we lose. But nothing else changes. We can buy for another 2. So if you, I think like economy makes such a huge part in the game if you buy smart. But I can also like getting like now PTSD all the time from these ecos. You often lose also these stupid deagle rounds, and it's so breaking. Your mentality is just fucking. You don't know what to do with your life anymore. So I can see like why they say like, okay, forcing is sometimes good, but I think like especially now when you say like the city side is so super strong with the M-Force, just save. You just lose 1 round. Give it to them. Here, take it. I give it to you if you want for myself. I even type killing console, play next round. So I don't know. I think economy makes such a huge part of the game, and like just think about like when you lose the next round. Let's say you lose the next round again, and then you're absolutely fucked. You lose like 2 equip rounds maybe on top that you could have had if you just save. Sometimes way smarter. And it's also what I learned also from Kuben. He also had the same philosophy like Gopi had in this regard. He made us save in some rounds where many people wouldn't have saved. And I think that's very good.
Speaking of Gob, I actually have also PTSD practicing up against you guys leading up to majors. It was always full shit show. I've never tried in my career as a coach being part of a server where the opponent literally bought CC armor 15 rounds in a row.
He was crazy sometimes.
It was like, what is happening? Like
it was also because he's very stubborn. He was very stubborn because if he played a round and he knows it works, he will make you fucking play it 100 times until it fucking works. But he knows that we fucked it up. It's not that we had low guns or whatever. He knows that his call was very good and we were supposed to win the round. And then he gets in his set and says, buy again, buy again, buy again.
By the way, that's also MSL.
That's an issue of him.
That's also MSL, I'm telling you right now.
It is.
Yes.
It is. They have to be all crazy.
Yes.
These guys are all a little bit.
Because as you said, the key thing there, which I actually love, by the way, because I always say this, I once had a comment, this is way back now in the day, but once upon a time I was arguing with Happy, the old envious IGL, and he told me, like, you don't know what it's like to work with people like Shocks and Kenny. They have star player ego. And I was like, you have fucking IGL ego, mate. All the great IGLs have one too, you know. Because as you're saying, the key thing there, if you're a casual fan that you missed there is, it's not that he just called the round for no reason. It's that he knows it was the right call from reading the game, and it's a player that fucked it up. So the players are going to be like, that's the wrong call, let's do something else. It's like, no, you're going to do it right now, and we're going to win this fucking round, even if it means we run it 3 more times. It's kind of true. That's also the battle always between the players and the IGL, right, Ruggah?
Yes.
Yeah, it is, man. Like these things, like I think MSL and Aleksib did it as well. Like these, I think I even saw it when we prep for big ones, like the B explosions on Mirage, an example. Holy shit, like they could run it 5 or 6 times in a row thinking, okay, it didn't work, so they expect us to come A, we do it again. And then you do it again, and then you get stuck in the thinking, now we can't go A. Now it's impossible.
Because they're going to guess exactly.
Again, you know? Yes. So it's like, it's actually crazy, but it's funny looking back at it.
Sure.
And by the way, for all the viewers, the best balance is not to balance.
True.
And also, by the way, in our defense back then, the money reset was way different.
That's
so if
true.
you back then force buy and you like make 3 or 4 kills,
Yes.
if you win the next round, it can change the outcome of the game. So that's why sometimes it was also good, like keep forcing. If you keep the economy of the enemy slow, because 1 round win back then breaks you all the way to the $1,400 again. So that was also a part, I think, in that.
I mean, this whole discussion, this is also why IGLs and coaches are different to other players, because the other player just thinks of the round in front of him. He's thinking about getting this gun here and shooting that guy he sees on his screen. The IGL and the coach have to think bigger picture, like what's the flow of the game and the economic flow, like I'm saying. Some players are just way behind on catching up. Like, I'll tell you another area, Ruggah, I feel like some teams are way behind on, is I understand the CT saves, because the CT economy is so dangerous. Dude, I do not get some of these fucking, like an obvious team to me would be someone like a Cloud9 or something. I don't get some of these T-round saves, dude, because here's the thing. The T-round economy, it can be so cheap for those AKs, and you can make Mac 10s work and so. So, like, the one I can't handle is, it's when they do the save where they're right. For them to have, like, a buy next round, they need a save. But it's like, if you actually know the money of the other team, dude, if you take any guns off them, it's getting harder and harder. You know what? Like, it's called, like, the war of attrition in English. You know, like, even if you don't win it, you can lose the round. But if you kill, like, 2 of their guys, and especially if it's Yorpa, dude, like, you can just wreck their economy, even though they get the round win on the board. Like, that's sort of like a hidden win in a way.
I think like the T savings are very hard like to master, right? Because I actually think if there was one thing MSL knew about the system, like the money system back then, it was, I don't want to save 2 AKs if I can go and kill them and then have 1 round where we have the same money and then we buy for the rest of the game, kind of.
Exactly.
Because saving these 2 weapons and then you get tricked, what do you do then? Basically, okay, I understand if you have 8k in the bank, right? You can save them, doesn't really matter. But if you have nothing, now the 2 AKs that has nothing saved, the other 3 gets the money bonus, 2.4. What do? Do you buy up around the weapons or you save? And then the next round, the guys will still not have an AK. So how do you deal with it, right?
Yes.
And I think back then, the logical conclusion was try and search the kills, try and even out the economy so we don't get this weird stuff. But I do also want to say, Navi kind of fucked it for everyone. Because then all of a sudden they just gave the AK to Symbol and he just went ham, right? So,
yes, true.
So it kind of destroyed all the logic in these senses.
The problem with that is, though, that's where every now and then as a coach you got to be harsh, because if the player's like, well, look what Navi do, like, you aren't simple, okay? End of story. You know what I mean? Exactly. End of story. Shut the fuck up. Because, by the way, the T saves, people will know this one if they watch my content. One of my biggest pet peeves is also when you save way too early in the clock. Like, think of a map like Inferno. If you just save, like, on the A bomb site and they're in the B bomb site, but you like give them the whole clock, maybe in this scenario, maybe they're doing, right, they're gonna fucking find you. And the one that kills me, Rock, is when they do the 2-gun saves. Already we're probably not getting a full buy, and last second my young like 19-year-old thinks he's hot shit player, like 1 second left on the clock, peeks out. Like, I just want to pause time and be like, bro, what are you going to gain here? Because your 1 kill and $300 is not worth when you now die. And the second you die and lose that gun, like, obviously, fans, this is just metaphorical. I would never hit anyone, of course. But if I was the coach, I'd be like, what the fuck? Because that, I don't know if there's anything that hurts me more than that. You've lost the round and the gun. You fucked the whole thing up. But to a player, like Aleksib and LG again, they just want to have fun. They want to, last second, they want to have a shot at this guy. Like, they even do it with the AWP sometimes. Like, I know your mind, that's the AWP. Hide behind the wall. Like, but we had a saying back in the day, take your hands off the keyboard, hide behind the wall.
Yeah. It's very interesting what you say also, because like the timing. Today in Counter-Strike or in general in FPS shooters, many aspects are actually a skill. Let's say baiting, planting the bomb.
Yes.
Like how you say saving a gun, thinking about the time. Let's say it's 45 seconds on the map, on the clock, and it's 5v2, and you decide already to save somewhere. If they hunt you and they will let you live until the last second, freeze time is over. Yep. Now they kill you because they have boxed you already in. They will know. They will gather info. If they realize, okay, they're saving, let's hunt. We have the money for it. And if they kill you after the time, then you're my friend with the Glock next round with $200. Good luck. And then your game is actually fucked. That's why many things are a skill these days. Like the things are being mastered. Like I say, also, for example, bomb planting. It's so fucking crucial how you plant the bomb, timing, where you plant, communication, cover here. Because let's say you go out Mirage on A side, you're doing full execute. There's grenades flying over everywhere. And if your planter is just running onto site and just planting somewhere without like telling his teammates, okay, this is where I need the cover from or whatever, just like make small calls. It's a huge skill. That's why, like in our team back then, some people were not allowed to plant. It was just pretty much always me. It's true.
No, but what I love is that's the greatest God B angle of all time. It's like you're not even allowed to plant the bomb, bro. Like,
you have to understand how
says the same, that it's a skill.
Yes,
like it's a skill to plant the bomb.
You have to understand that sometimes you have to plant the bomb just by understanding, okay, how are the cities positioned? Where is the most likely position that we will take space again? It's so many factors come into that, and
by the
it's
way,
not only about bomb planting.
No, I know what you mean though. Like, I'll give you another case. I also see in the modern day way too many teams where they plant and you can tell they did not com the fucking bomb spot properly. Yeah. And the amount of times that the T that couldn't normally, you'd win this round every time in matchmaking on a normal spot, they're like spraying the guy where the guy isn't, and you're like, bro, like I can tell you with the player that just didn't see where it was planted there, and so someone's commenting it's on like default, but they just give like a general call, you know. And so it's a nightmare watching the guy, because obviously we have X-ray, we're on the stream out, we will all see he's never going to hit him. He's just spraying away in the smoke. Like, that's got to be the worst feeling ever if you're that guy's teammate, mate. Like, oh, bloody hell. If we just commed, basically, like, or agreed where you were planting. Like he is right? Even that's a skill. Like, there's a logic to how you do it in your team.
There's a lot of like skills to be mastered in CS. One of them, as you say, is like planting the bomb, understanding where to plant the bomb, what can you do around it. If you use Mirage as an example, right? The guy just like you have the whole A side and the guy plants default, and you have one guy instantly doing the flank, meanwhile the others like get retaken. Even though he would win it 9 out of 10 times because the guy has 10 HP in the 1v1, he loses because the bomb is planted default, right? So these type of things. And then you even bring up a better point about shooting the guy diffusing. If you actually pay attention, it always happened to the same type of players. Some players are just so good at understanding where the bomb is, they always shoot the guy through the smoke. Zipex, very good example. How often does he lose a 1v1 because of a smoke diffuse? Like, never. And then you have other players that are basically like spraying 30 bullets, just hoping, praying to God, you know, if I hit him, if I do not. And it's a skill. And a lot of players that are not experienced doesn't know how to like, okay, how do I actually go about this situation? Because you can go full crazy, spray the whole thing, or you can like tap, and sometimes you even see the smoke, like the blood for the smoke, or you hear he's getting hit.
Yes.
But again, pressure situations, weird stuff happens, you know.
By the way, what you just said there is also one of my biggest pet peeves. Younger players, why are you spraying full auto, the whole 30 bullets? If you're not killing him, he's not there, is he, you idiot? Like, that literally tap. If you don't hit first, just tap a couple. Because think about this, right? Imagine you with the bomb diffuser, and you know you've got like 6 seconds, right? Imagine he just taps like 3 bullets like that along a line. Like, you're going to die. Especially if you didn't have 100 health, you are going to die. It's a nightmare being the guy diffusing. You're just giving that guy an out because you're fucking spraying all around him like a bullet outline. And the other thing I'd say is this, Ruggah, this actually brings it back to coaching in a brilliant way. This is an area where it's so easy for young players, because I know a lot of young players, they really do think like skill with the gun is the biggest quality in Counter-Strike, and they judge each other on that. They think like, right, I am better than him because my stats, like, but that game understanding is different. Like what we're talking about now, you're all talking about veteran things that like things that people have to learn. So as bad as it sounds, even though you might be really good at shooting an AK, maybe someone like Ruggah, I mean, I know he does. He's forgotten more than you know about the other details of the game and how you work with a teammate and how you go out as a pack and how you plant the bomb. These are all like nuanced aspects that like players have to be open to. They have to understand they don't know that yet if they come from some tier 3 team, right?
I think a lot of times they have to, right? Obviously, there will always be one guy that is the exception that basically comes up the full package. Yikinda springs to mind, right? I don't think that he needs to get told on the teams how to spray the smoke when it's getting diffused. But like, obviously, some of these players coming up, they have so many bad habits. Like, it's actually crazy that they think Face-Its or like tier 4 practices is the same as playing at tier 1. So there are so many habits. One of them spraying the smokes. Other things could like be different things, but basically, if a guy's diffusing, you have 5 seconds. Normally, 5 seconds in CS:GO is a shit ton of time, right? Like if you go out at a place, you have 5 seconds to aim. Okay, I'll take it without the guy shooting back, right? But as soon as the smoke comes, holy shit, 5 seconds feels like 1.5 now, right? And it's also keeping the cool as these young players that are understanding these type of things. But yeah, I fully agree with what you say about the young players coming up, that they have so many bad habits that they need someone to tell them what is right and wrong, even though they don't want to hear it. And that's probably the biggest thing that we as coaches have with the guys coming up, because obviously they can shoot. They learn a lot about the game by watching. They also hear analysts talking, but it's the small stuff, right? if you don't plant the bomb at the right spot on Inferno and you play after plant from pit, I guarantee you, I will fucking tell you next time, why the fuck are you planting the bomb here? Plant it where you have the better post-plant position, right? And if you play a 2v2 with a guy inside abs and a guy on the short on Inferno, I'm probably also gonna tell you, what the fuck are you doing, guys? You have 10 seconds to get better position, and I don't care that this works in your retake servers. Like, come on, be realistic, right? Understand these type of things. And with retakes, it's actually funny. I keep saying the same thing to my players, that the best thing that happened for North back then was the HTC International 2v2 tournament, right? Where everyone played I think it was Kenyan Shocks that beat Asian and KGB in the final, right? When they came back from that tournament, our clutch game became it became crazy good. All of a sudden, we now understood, okay, this is what it actually means playing the 2v2s together. This is what it actually means having good positions, you know? Even though it sounds so basic when you talk about it, I can open up the latest demo on HLTV and I can find examples of players that don't understand this. So this is also what we need to transfer of knowledge to like the players coming up, that shooting headshots doesn't necessarily win you 2v2s. It helps, but if you die because you take a stupid decision, I'm gonna look back and say, what the fuck are you doing?
By the way, also, how bullshit is that for a 2v2 tournament? Like, you're just playing with normal team. Oh, and who's on their team? Oh, Kenny S and Shock's like, oh, that sounds fair. Yeah, reasonable. Yeah, cheers. The fuck?
But it was a fun concept. I actually like it.
k0nfig.
What we had, for example, for back then, like, how we called like these players, these coming up players, ABC players. k0nfig probably has used also this term. These days, I think the most important, like, ABC player means for me, like, the coming up players from the tier 2, tier 3 scene, now that are coming like into the higher scene, let's say, they all kind of play the same way. Just the one guy is shooting better, the other guy is shooting a little bit less, you know? But everyone has like the same patterns. Everyone plays like this A, B, C game. Everything always happens like the same kind of, okay? But you have to shift these players to make their alphabet different. Like, they have to be CBA all of a sudden. So things don't always look the same. Let's take an example. You're watching a demo of a player who's holding like, I don't know, stairs Crims on Mirage, okay? And you see like how he's playing, and you tell a player, okay, watch Crims demos, he's very good. He will always like try to do the same shit that he does. But brother, you have to have balances in your game. You have to make it look like different sometimes. You pretend that you're doing something, but it's like you're not doing it, you know? So all the coming up players are like always doing kind of pretty much the same thing, because every one of them has played on the same level, a lot of facets is from that, and I think like these players need like a different shifting to make them like less readable. I would say much more balanced, and yeah.
By the way, LEGIJA, I've got a little story for you, because you might not be aware of this, but if you go on k0nfig's YouTube channel, he famously this year has an editor who makes like voice com videos of like the real matches at the major and in the RMRs and stuff. And so you can hear the comms. Now, obviously, they edit it. Like, you don't just hear the whole com of the round. Like, most of it's like the funny stuff and the joke or whatever. Like, you don't hear the tactic, for example, for obvious reasons, and you don't hear the key call. Like, he does keep that stuff out. But one thing I found from listening to those, that no one else is going to get the reference to the game, but I thought I'd tell you, because it allows us to explain a cool little big detail. Even though he's the only one who does it, he doesn't make the rest of his team do this, LEGIJA. k0nfig still does the fucking God B, throwing a flash, boom, when it goes off. Because if people don't know, LEGIJA told me about this with God B a few years back when they were in big. Basically, in God B's team, it's quite interesting, Ruggah. I've actually never heard of another team that does this. What God B's teams do is, because, you know, everyone knows internally the timing of when the flashbang pops. But the problem is when someone else throws it, like, he just says, like, throw the flash, but you don't have the same timing. So what they do in God B's teams is they actually say boom when it explodes, so that you know, like, right, that's the second to turn away. That way you don't have to be, like, perfectly on, like, the timer on the clock. Like, it's actually, like, mad useful. Like, I'm amazed. That's why I'm amazed in FaZe. It's just k0nfig does it, mate. He does it and the rest of them benefit. But, like, none of them even do it. None of the other fuckers even do it. I can't believe it. I think it's mega useful, mate. I would have everyone doing it.
But then I have to question, like, Finn, why the fuck do you not force this? It's like,
I don't get it.
And also, by the way, I have to actually give the actual person credit who actually invented it. It was Zonic.
Okay.
Because GoB back then copied it from MTW. He noticed that they're calling it, so he copied it from them.
Okay.
So for that,
there are players that do it, right? But
there's probably a few.
I think the difference is they don't do it every time. I think Snappi does it every time, obviously, because he's from the same era of 1.6 as Sonic, right? So they probably played the gathers and everything back in the day like that. I still hear it in our team as well, but it's such a hard habit to like start doing, and it's one of these habits that if 4 guys does it, I guarantee you the 5th guy do it as well. But if only one, it's one of these things. Yeah, but I can hear it anyway.
Exactly.
It's just like lazy, you know.
It makes you feel stupid. I remember when Goppy invented it, I felt stupid.
Yes,
I felt
exactly.
stupid, but like whenever best example was Cash. Whenever you throw this lurk smoke on MBK, and now your execute is starting, left side smokes, whatever, and now the flashes are coming, and enemies are throwing grenades in your face. You don't know what the fuck is happening around you. You're maybe blind from a different flash, but the boom helps you so much to hit your timing when to actually go out, and I think it's holy fuck important.
I'll even say, by the way,
better.
Yeah, go on, Roger. Go on.
I think the one thing you did better that Alex also talked to me about is the other type of flashes, like the back flashes that you had names for, and also the fish flashes. I think these are actually even more useful than the boom, because these ones are the one that makes or break an area when you enter it, right? And for context, like fish flash is the one you just throw as kind of the bait that everyone needs to like turn or whatever, and then the other one is kind of the ones where you run with it, and then you don't need to think about it, but the flash is in your back, you know?
Yes.
We're not doing it fully, but I think the idea is very good, like from a theoretical standpoint.
I think that's actually fucking ridiculously crazy, how much impact or how much it helps. Like, because sometimes you know that the AWPA is, for example, or a rifle is holding a corner, which is like 100% you know he's there, and sometimes if you just throw the flash, like, very obvious, you know the timing of when the flash is gonna pop. So he either makes a decision he will turn, or he will eat the flash. And if you then know that he's there, for example, AWPA pick on train Ivy, you flash it off the wall, you know at one point he will either have to turn, or you just swing and he will be blind. So I think it makes so big difference for the first guy to go in. Then you have the silent flash, which just pops around the corner, so they cannot turn from it, but you know that you cannot just swing out with it. You have to wait for the flash to pop. And that's why I think the boom also helped us tremendously.
Yeah, I've got 2 points on this. One, I'll even say, like, me and Lurpis, like, we even have a show on my own called Know-It-Alls of CS. We do think we know it all about CS. Not we literally know everything, but we know a lot, and we've followed the game a long time. I'll even just say this. When we... Yeah, listen, mate, I beat you in a million fucking arguments, but for the cameras, let's pretend. Yeah, true, whatever you say.
I said Lurpis pretends he knows more.
Oh, right, true.
I haven't defended you, man. What the fuck?
Fair enough. I feel bad for sort of digging in on you there. The old instincts kicked in. It's all good. No, but here's the thing, though. I remember when you told us that. We both actually did look at each other like, that is pretty good, I can't lie. I can't even talk shit on him on that. That's pretty good. We should have thought of that. How did we not know about that? It's true. That's why I give you credit. It's actually pretty fucking fire, because as you say, Ruggah, it seems like such a small thing, but it's like, then just do it. If we all just do this tiny thing, we get 0.01% extra. Like, that's worth a lot in the long run. Like, it adds up over time. And also, the other thing you were saying about the flashes, there's another thing if you're a casual fan you're going to miss. Dude, I can always tell the people, I won't call them out by name, because I'll be kind. Well, if you ever talk shit to me on Twitter, I'll just fucking use your name straight up and just fucking wreck you. Don't worry about it. So just stay in your lane. But you know the ones who do those video channels where they go, here is a tactic that FaZe Clan did in the major that they just won now. You know the people who do those rounds, right? I can always tell the people who just watched the round 10 times and wrote everything down, and they like make up all these reasons afterwards. Like, yeah, see what he was doing there was he knew that the CT would run. He didn't know any of that, you idiot. Like, you're overreading it. But I can always tell the person who knows the real game, because what you're saying now, they don't. The ones who are trying to make everything like an anime, like he knew that this would happen. No, the ones that the way we can tell it's real is the ones who know what the fake elements are. That's the part where you know, because like you're saying, it's about like the old Molotov throws that people used to do on the B-bomb site on fucking Inferno, right? Obviously, the player moves every time the Molotov comes, so the Molotov doesn't really burn him, but either A, it's to move him, or more genius is you move him and then the nade goes where he's moving to, and then he's running to a nade, or he gets flat. As you say, you throw the one flash, and as he looks, he turns into the other flash, the real flash. Like, those are the levels that, unfortunately, if you're a fan, it's not your fault. You're never really going to get to know that, because they're not going to tell you it. Like, they're not going to give that away in the interview and tell it, by the way, there's this amazing fake flash we're doing on B that we're getting with every round. Like, that's the shit they never say in the interview, is it? That's why they just go like, we're good on Mirage. Like, that's all they say. And then they go, ooh, fascinating. Over to the desk. Do you think Mirage will be played? Like, and we all have to make some bullshit up, don't we? No, people don't know, mate. That's why, by the way, I like to do this show. The game's so much more deeper than you'll ever realise just from fucking interviews and just fun shit on desk. We haven't got time to go into all the intricacies and stuff. By the way, Ruggah, can you think of any other good examples of that? Is there any other like little innovations people have come up with that you think are interesting?
I think the biggest one we've seen, but that was still like quite old now, was the one where you use the molly to set up a proper smoke, right?
Right.
Like these type of things, like the smoke and molly elements, I think they are the ones that keeps getting innovated right now.
There's some genius like one-wayers on those, isn't there? Where you can like, because you make, obviously you put the molly there and you can make like the smoke like stay in midair and shit. Oh, some genius ones.
There's a lot of cool stuff out there, but now, as you say, now everyone knows the meta, right? So how do you break the meta? By outplaying what they think is coming. So that's also why you sometimes see when they, let's use Inferno as the example, now they molly, like from T-side banana, they molly top pool, and the CT's like, oh, nice, I have 8 seconds, I can chill, I can save my util, but what happens? Boom, they extinguish, and now they go, right? So these type of small elements on how to break down the meta is... I think those are the most interesting ones, because all this like new type of util, of course, is nice that everyone sees it, but at the end of the day, it's still a piece of util to enter the bomb site, right? So,
I always think, even though they set up CS as like this is an easy game for everyone to watch, it's like, yeah, on the most basic level. Because I always think if you were a brand new fan, you never watched CS before, and you watched an Inferno game, and you saw the two teams run to banana and throw all this utility, and then nobody ever has a fight. It's just like Flash goes with the smoke, you'd be like, what was all that for? And you'd be like, I can't explain it, because I'd have to actually show you like 100 other demos to show you why that was genius and the right response from both players, like exactly. And that's why neither player could take a fight, because they couldn't. It's too complicated. You have to know all the backstory as well.
Yeah, like there's a lot of baggage that teams try to outplay each other. Obviously, some parts of like game plan. The other one is meta. But I do think there are some cool new players coming up that knows how to fuck with this. And I think if you want to do any shout out, I think the guy Stare, like he is very very
the guy
cool
from Sprout,
yeah, like very cool in how...
No, actually Danish, right?
Sorry. Yeah, he's the one that Astralis wanted, but they wanted him like free or some stupid shit like that. Yeah.
Because when I watched him play, he basically fit the role that k0nfig had in Astralis before. Right. You need to make this room on your own. You have limited set of util. Okay, now go do it, and that's not an easy task. And I think the things he does good, that also some of, like, let's say the heroic and outsiders players do, is they fuck with the meta a bit, right? They always try to be one step ahead or try to let the opponent think they're doing something, and then they throw another thing at them. And I think that's very interesting part of CS, that a lot of like spectators right now, as you say, they don't understand what's happening. Why all of a sudden a guy is sneaking through a smoke at a random timing? It looked like, yeah, that was nice. Now I'm gonna do it again next round, and then he's just gonna get obliterated from the server because now the whole situation is not the same. So these kind of where you manipulate one part of the area to get more room on the other, that is where I think CS right now is at, and it's very interesting because no round is actually the same anymore. It's very nice.
By the way, I thought as a last topic, because at some point Legijah has to go and do practice or some shit like that, I thought with our last topic we could do, it'd be interesting, would be we're a big fan on this show, understandably, of Blade, because he is one of the masterminds of Counter-Strike, and he is also super OG. Like I always say, that guy might have gone to more lands than anyone in human history. Like he was going to 1 billion lands at 1.6, if people don't know. And one of the things I am very impressed with, I want to get your take on this, Ruggah, in the Navi squad now, is even though Navi hasn't won much since they got rid of the Boom Itch and they did an IGL switch, like, dude, the idea you can even just make an IGL switch and still be really good and have all the structure, like, people have seen, I don't know if you've noticed, Legijah, where he does like those full printouts for every player. It's not just even the IGL, every player has like a fucking, like, it's almost like a laminated like document, like, welcome to page 17, like, and they've got all the fucking strats and all the shit like that. It's no wonder like his team's able to have this structure. Like he doesn't even have to just get it all perfect in the scrims. Some of it's on the paper. Because I noticed, when Jim won the major, in his interview afterwards, he basically said like he actually thinks that should be removed. Like you shouldn't be allowed the notepads. And I know fans were like, what? But it's I sort of get it, because it's like actually that's giving that does give the coach a lot more power, I feel like, than people think with the current Valve system. What are your thoughts on this, Ruggah? Because it seems like that's part of how they've managed to maintain the Navi structure.
I think the one thing that always stands out when I see this like big folders is like how do they keep it updated all the time? Because from practice and from officials, as well, you change like the smallest detail every single day, right? So do they then do a new printout every single time they played? Or
he must have a fucking printer in his hotel room, exactly. Like, I know what this fuck.
So obviously that's the thing that stands out, right? But I think it's a compromise, right? I think it's the compromise from not having coaches being able to call the whole game, but at least you give them some sort of information. But at the end of the day, they still need to do it themselves, right? Because remember, we had this like big back and forth. Okay, the coaches can talk full time now. Do we then make the in-game leader? It would be better CS, blah, blah, blah. I think this is the compromise that is very good for the level shown on the server, but also for what happens as a spectator. Because to be honest, I would much rather see a Navi in full cylinder running all the stuff, having all the balances, shooting headshots because they know what's to happen, than the old Zeus Navi where they're just like, okay, let's go at 20 seconds and hope for the best, you know? So I think from an entertainment point of view, I like it. Also from a coaching point of view, I love it because obviously we get more impact out of everyone on the server. So yeah, I'm very pro having the papers at least.
By the way, LEGIJA, you know, on some of the past episodes, I know especially when, it might have been the one we had Toby on or something, I know when we talked about the old big team, you were always someone who was of the philosophy, if you want to have a really tactical team, you're not just going to be good at the first tournament, it's going to take months and months to build it up because all the players have to understand like the basic game plan, the specific things, what their role is. I also think there's another area you can tell played as a coach has have an impact on Navi. Because like I've seen some games, mate, that are like, there's no way a bunch of players, especially he's got players like Perfecto wasn't even at tier 1 before when we went online, remember? Yeah. And then fucking Bit was nobody. He only came around last year. So there's no way a player just has this understanding. But I've seen them on some CT halves LEGIJA where like the T's do that thing where you do like the slight probe into the site. You're just trying to see if there's anyone going to peek. And two of you with an AK are trained on that point. And if he peeks, you're going to punish him, right? Dude, Navi has some insane rounds where no one peeks. They just hold perfectly all together. Like everyone is like in unit. And then like, it's really hard to attack a bomb set when no one ever peeks on you. And you have to just guess where all the people, and like that has to be the coach. There's no way a player just figures that out and is on the same page. I feel like those are the areas to me you can sort of feel the fingerprints of the coach.
That's also what I said earlier. I think like he's the perfect example. He has a team where he has super young players. He made the team and his team plays the way he wants to. And that's why it's always not always easy. And on top of that, he has obviously the best player in the world and Bit one of the best players in the world, in my opinion. And I think for him it's good because every time he gets a new player, he can super easy work one-on-one with him. Super easy. Because let's say you have a coach like AlexiB, in-game leader like AlexiB, or someone who has like much more saying. Because Boomich, what can Boomich say? He was a super inexperienced player. He had to learn from Blade. So Blade gives him the way how to do it, and he just has to implement it. And fuck, I lost track now.
Young?
No, not Samda Young.
Okay. You were talking about like if you have young players that you can have more say in how they play or something, I assume, than if you have like a veteran player as the IGL, I'm guessing. If you bring new players into the team, you can make them do your style of...
No, what I wanted to say is like he gets like, for him it's much easier to like implement this system that he wants to play for a player if he switches one person out. So I think for someone who has like then an in-game leader who has much more saying, then you have to bring the in-game leader in as well, so he understands what he wants. And in the end, in reality, the in-game leader would have to do it all himself.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be even the coach that because I cannot like. Yes, I understand probably your philosophy, but I'm not into your brain. I cannot understand like everything that you want 100%. So it has to be like the guy who's giving the direction, the one who is creating the game plan, who's creating all the rules that you have in game, all the counters or whatever it is. So I think this is the best thing, and that's why I think the Blade has tremendous impact on this team. Tremendous, regardless if he has like simply in the
tournaments.
It's yes,
also
of course.
We see in tournaments, then like hey, I have casual 3-hour sessions with Bit, and be like,
yes,
okay, nice. But yeah, it's because if you have simple, right, you need to have pieces that know what they need to do around him. Because if you just have 4 guys that are full clueless, just playing, okay, I have my smoke, what am I gonna do with it? It doesn't matter. You have the best player in the world, so they need a system for him to work. And also for Electronic to be able to move the pieces around. And what you need is a follow-up guy that can do it on the other side of the map, which would be Bit in their case, right? But yeah, I like their system, and I think he is like a front person for everyone that wants to think more coaching in terms of like having more responsibility, giving more authority to the coach as well. So I think he's a role model for a lot of us coaches, I think.
By the way, just because it's the last quick question, the one player I didn't ask about that I thought would be cool to ask about at the end, because it's another one where coaches and IGLs will get it, but fans won't. This is the guy when you were in North that everyone wanted to be caught every fucking week. It's obviously AZ, right? Here's what I get that they don't, ruggah. So you give me your thoughts on it. But basically, from what I've heard behind the scenes and just watching what roles he played in the team, right? This is an example where the fans just looking at like frag movies or something going, he's not that crazy, or like, you know, this up and coming guy would be a sick, explosive player. But it's like, as far as I can tell, he's just like the perfect fucking teammate. He's just a soldier, just does whatever you want, right?
Fully. Like, he was very underrated. And fun fact, I actually think he has some insane highlights. He would probably make one hell of a like CS movie. I still remember the USP one from Ticket on Mirage.
Metal, yeah.
Holy shit, man. But yeah, like, he was the perfect guy basically to have in any team. Like, his comms were good. He was experienced. Like, he has insane aim. He never made any mistakes. He just did his job, followed blindly into whatever. So, like, he was a piece that would be hard to replace no matter what team he was playing on. The only team where I think it was easy for them to replace AZ was when they brought in Nico as the replacement in FaZe, right? But every other team, I think his impact would be felt when leaving kind of the team. I also do want to say, I think he had potential for more, but with his personality being a bit more laid back and maybe not the biggest like showman in terms of like playing the best in the on the stages and stuff, I think unfortunately for him, he kind of got stuck at the being the good teammate part, because I actually think when he got picked up by FaZe, he was mind-blowingly good.
Yeah. That was mega, yeah. Money doesn't grow on trees, and believe it or not, just watching a video for free with the odd ad doesn't really pay the bills. So thanks to the following people for kindly supporting my work and this particular content. And those people are, of course, Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion, my main man. You know what? There are plenty of perks to be found on my Patreon. Like, you can find out who upcoming guests are for my reflections, interviews, and talk shows. You can ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Might get roasted if it's a bit spicy in how you phrase it. You can figure out which pieces of content I might want to do next. I often ask people which they think between certain ideas, offer suggestions. You can even take part in one of those long discussions with me about all kinds of esports, whatever's on your mind. So if any of those sound like something that takes your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description below.